Hey, hey, hey. Welcome to another Out of This World compilation in the rLounge. When you're trying to gift your family a dream vacation to Hawaii and your sister goes full Godzilla on your plans. Today in the rLounge, grab your sunglasses, pack your bags, and get ready for some well-deserved R&R. That is, until you come back home to reality. Sister banned me from the trip I paid for, so I canceled her ticket and went for the family trip without her. I, 29 male, come from a relatively close-knit family. We are 3 siblings. I, my younger brother, 26 male, and my younger sister, Bonnie, 24 female. I share a good bond with my brother, but I've always had a bit of a rocky relationship with Bonnie. It's not that we don't get along, but she's always been a bit entitled. Growing up, our parents tended to favor her slightly because she was the baby of the family. While I've tried to let it slide, there have been instances where her behavior has really tested my patience. Not only me, but my brother also faces the same issue with her. His patience runs thinner than mine, so every time they are in the same room, there would be a scuffle between them. Earlier this year, I received a beefy bonus at work. My parents' anniversary was around the corner. I thought it would be a great idea to treat my family to a nice vacation. It had been years since we all went somewhere together, and I thought it would be a fantastic way to reconnect and celebrate our parents' anniversary. I planned a week-long trip to Hawaii, covering all expenses, flights, accommodations, activities, everything. Hawaii was the place my parents went for their honeymoon, so nothing better than giving them the opportunity to reminisce about their younger days. When I announced the trip to my parents, they were over the moon. I knew they would be delighted, especially because of the location. I was confident that my brother would also appreciate my gesture. I was only apprehensive about Bonnie's reaction. It's hard to predict her mood. However, on hearing about the trip, both of them jumped in excitement, especially Bonnie. She started ranting about everything she wanted to do and the Instagram reels she'd make. I shrugged it off, happy that she was excited. Everyone seemed thrilled, and I was glad I could do something nice for my family. However, that moment of happiness soon turned bitter when Bonnie started nagging that she wanted to plan the vacation. I told her the trip was sponsored by me, so I wanted to plan everything myself. She threw tantrums about it, saying I was not good at planning stuff, so I hand over this responsibility to her. It was not an ask from her, but moreover, a demand that I pass down everything to her. There were a couple of reasons I wanted to do it myself. First, it was my treat. Second, I know Bonnie's extravagant choices when others are paying for them. She would book the costliest stuff without thinking twice. I had booked everything as per my budget. Yeah, man, she has this thing. If someone takes her out, she would order the most premium dish on the menu. On the other hand, her treat is a takeaway from Subway. My parents tried to mediate that if I was busy, I could take Bonnie's help in planning the activities. I told everyone that the activities were a surprise to keep them on their toes. Bonnie insisted to know them prior so that they could go shopping for appropriate outfits for the activities. I assured her there was nothing that would catch her off guard. I arranged for a few surprises during the trip, like a private luau and a snorkeling adventure. It was going to be epic. The weeks leading up to the trip were exciting and tiring. I had to shop for everything. I ran a shopping spree with my brother, whereas Bonnie was running a shopping marathon. However, as the dates came closer, her nagging became persistent. She was upset that I hadn't let her plan it. She felt left out and accused me of trying to upstage her. She annoyed me to the point where I gave her the itinerary of the trip to get her off my back. She immediately called me and was furious. She pointed out a few things that should be rearranged to make everyone feel comfortable. Her suggestion sounded legitimate, so I moved the schedule as per her recommendation, and that boosted her ego. She was like, "That's the reason I wanted to plan it. Attention to detail, you see?" This made me wonder that if there was the slightest inconvenience in the trip, Bonnie would come behind me with her sarcastic comments, so better let her take this over. So I gave her the access to my account to make any changes. I told her to not make any major changes in the schedule and no addition or removal of activities. She could only reschedule it, and that too only after my approval. She agreed. She immediately announced in the family group that she had taken over the planning for the trip and made some changes. Few additions she did, which was pretty cool, like we all wear matching outfits each day. It was fine until then. A week before the trip, I saw that she had canceled some of the activities I booked and replaced them with ones she preferred. She also mentioned that she had made executive decisions regarding the itinerary and that everyone should follow her lead. I was livid. This was supposed to be a gift from me, and she had completely hijacked it. I called her, trying to reason with her, but she was adamant. She said that since she was better at planning, I should let her handle it. I stood firm on my ground and said no way. She had done enough to sabotage my plan, and now she should back off. She accused me of being controlling and hung up. That night, I received a call from my parents. Bonnie told on me, and they wanted to know what was going on. I explained the situation on a surface level to not spoil the surprise activities for them. I expected them to understand. To my shock, they sided with Bonnie. They said that since she was so excited about the trip, I should let her have some control over it. They didn't seem to grasp that she had completely taken over and disregarded my efforts and money. They said it doesn't matter who was planning for it and who is paying. The fact is we are family and we should have the best time together in Hawaii. I felt frustrated and unappreciated. In a moment of rage, I wanted to cancel the whole trip, but I calmed down and took a step back. I didn't cancel the trip, but I stopped engaging with the planning. I figured if Bonnie wanted to be in charge so badly, then let her handle it. I can sit back and enjoy myself, even if it wasn't the trip I envisioned. However, things took a turn for the worse 2 days ago. We are set to leave tomorrow. I received a notification that my tickets had been canceled successfully. I was like, what the hell? I immediately called up the airlines and got to know that it was canceled from my account, so there's nothing they can do about it. No surprise, it was Bonnie. I called her in anger. She answered as if nothing had happened. I yelled, how dare you cancel my tickets? She chuckled and responded, oh yeah, I did that. Isn't that funny? Haha. I lost my crap and shouted, care to explain? She replied, okay, I hate to say this. I know you are funding it and blah blah blah, but we can't have you on the trip. Dude, you're too controlling and your negative attitude would ruin the vacation for everyone. I have discussed this with everyone and the family has agreed to dump you. You are not worth spoiling our trip. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The trip that I had paid for and planned was now happening without me. My sister had somehow convinced everyone that I was the problem, and they had all agreed to go along with it. At that moment, something in me snapped. I wasn't going to let her walk all over me. I logged into my account and canceled her ticket. I then rebooked it in my name and changed the password of the account so that she could not access it anymore or make any changes to the travel itinerary. I sent the message to the family group chat. Since Bonnie has decided I'm not welcome on the trip I paid for, I've canceled her ticket. If any of you wants to stay with her, I'll be happy to cancel your tickets too. The fallout was immediate. My brother called me immediately and said he had no idea about Bonnie's move. I narrated him the discussion I had with her, and he confirmed that she was making it up. He assured me that he had never agreed to dump me and was pretty sure that our parents would never ban me from the trip I was paying for. It was a relief to know that at least he was not turning blind-eyed to Bonnie's evilness. While I was still talking to him, my parents called me, furious that I had canceled Bonnie's ticket. They accused me of being petty and vindictive, but I stood my ground. I explained that I had planned and paid for the trip as a gift to the family, and if they didn't want me there, then I better take a solo trip, but I wouldn't give away this as charity and sacrifice myself. They confirmed they never asked Bonnie to cancel my tickets, but they are also not thrilled that I canceled hers. They want us all to go together for this trip. I told them I wasn't going to let her dictate the terms of my generosity. Bonnie, of course, was beside herself with rage. She sent me a barrage of angry texts, calling me every name under the sun. I forwarded the text to my parents to show them what their little monster was up to. My dad called me and volunteered to mediate the situation between us. He said he would loop in Bonnie in the call and she would apologize to me and I should rebook her ticket so that we can have the vacation together. I wanted to push back at this demand, but a part of me knew that Bonnie would never apologize, so I just said yes to my dad's proposal. He added Bonnie to the call. She was too angry to sense it was a conference call. Dad told her she acted mean by canceling my tickets, so she should apologize to me. Before listening any further, she snapped at Dad and said she wouldn't apologize because she did the right thing. We both could hear her sigh. Apologize to that jerk? My butt. Dad hung up the call. He had nothing to say after that. I called him back and said, do you now see how cruel your daughter is, or do you still want me to take her? He remained silent and said he was torn between two children. I know I have done the right thing, but I do feel sad that the trip would not be the same after this fallout. This was not how I wanted it. I envisioned this to be a family trip, and no matter what I feel about Bonnie, she is still part of the family. My brother and I might not be affected, but my parents would definitely be bothered by her absence. Thanks for reading. I'm looking forward to engaging in the comments. First, let's appreciate the irony that Bonnie, who can't plan a decent lunch without maxing out someone's credit card, thinking she could outdo you. The fact that she even tried to hijack your meticulously planned trip is both hilarious and infuriating. I mean, her idea of planning probably involves scrolling through Instagram and booking anything with more than 100 likes. Matching outfits? Cute. Canceling your tickets? Not so much. And your parents? Bless their hearts. They're probably so used to Bonnie's antics that they can't see the forest for the entitled brat standing in the way. I can almost picture them suggesting that you let Bonnie help with the trip planning, like asking a toddler to drive a stick shift. So you canceled her ticket and rebooked it yourself? Absolutely brilliant. If Bonnie wants to play dirty, she should expect a bit of mud thrown back. Update 1. Here's a new update. The situation got worse between me and Bonnie. After being dumped from the trip, she ganged up against me. She tried to pull my brother by her side. She pitched him the idea of co-sponsoring the trip with her so that they all could abandon me. He laughed at her suggestion and asked if she had that much money to bear 50% of the trip expense. She said, "No, I don't have right now, but I'll pay you as soon as I can." My brother shook his head in disbelief that she wanted him to fund the whole trip while she would pose this to be half sponsored by her in front of my parents. We both knew that she would never pay him back. I mean, how would she? She doesn't have a real job. She works a minimum wage, and that too, she misses work whenever she is not in the mood. My brother asked her if she was serious about this. She responded, "Hell yeah, but if the Hawaii trip is too much to bear, we can go to Mexico." My brother burst out in laughter at her face and said he was not a fool to trade off a free ride to Hawaii with a paid trip to Mexico, and that too with her would make him a free photographer for the whole vacation. She hung up on him and called him a simp. Until the last moment, she tried to guilt trip my parents about cutting her off on the family trip. Thankfully, this time my parents stuck to their grounds that she had to apologize to me if she wanted a spot on the vacation. On the side rail, my parents tried to convince me to be a bigger person, forgive Bonnie, and take her with us, but I remained unmoved. The day of the trip arrived, and I went to the airport to meet my family. My brother was the only one who was jumping in excitement. My parents were still upset, but they had no choice but to accept that Bonnie wouldn't be joining us. As we boarded the plane, there was a tension in the air. I could see the disappointment in my parents' eyes. When we arrived in Hawaii, I executed my planning and ensured everyone had their best time. We went for the private luau, the snorkeling adventure, and even a helicopter tour of the island. Despite the initial discomfort, we started to relax and enjoy ourselves. My parents gradually warmed up to the idea that this was still a family vacation, albeit without Bonnie. Throughout the week, I received sporadic messages from Bonnie. She was still furious, and her texts were filled with anger and accusations. My parents occasionally checked in with her, but even they started to see that her behavior was unreasonable. We came back from the trip with loads of fresh memories. We had shared some incredible experiences, and the beauty of Hawaii had a way of melting away the tension. While my parents were still disappointed that Bonnie wasn't there, they appreciated the effort I had put into making the trip memorable. Bonnie had blocked me on social media. She was mad at her parents for choosing me over her. She said she wanted to cut them off, but she can't because she lives in their house. Too bad for her. She called my brother a freeloader and whatnot for siding with me. She also told him and my parents that she never wanted to see me again. It was painful, but I knew that I had done what I needed to do. I don't regret standing up for myself and setting boundaries, but I do wish things had turned out differently. Maybe one day Bonnie will realize that she was on the wrong side and we can mend our relationship. Until then, I'll hold on to the memories of that incredible trip. Thanks for reading this. The audacity to propose Mexico as a backup plan is pure comedy gold. As if anyone would trade a Hawaiian paradise for a Bonnie-funded escapade to Mexico, where your brother would likely end up as her unpaid Instagram photographer. Her idea of co-sponsoring it is as realistic as a unicorn riding a rainbow. It's sad that Bonnie can't see past her own entitlement to recognize the damage she's done. Maybe one day she'll wake up and realize that burning bridges isn't the best way to get across the river. Until then, you've got those amazing Hawaiian memories to hold on to, and hopefully, a lesson learned for everyone involved. Update 2. I have another update on my sister's saga. It's been a while of these incidents, but I was not getting time to update it here. After we came back from the trip, I went back to work. I had to put an extra hour to compensate for my leave, so I could not catch up with my parents about Bonnie. I knew at the back of my head that she must be throwing tantrums at them for enjoying the trip without her. To make her feel worse, my brother and I bombarded the social media with family pictures. It was fun. Almost 3 months later, I went to my parents and found Bonnie's room vacant. I asked them about her and got to know that they had finally thrown her out. Okay, actually not thrown her, but her moved out. She was not serious about her life and career. She missed work on a whim. Since she had no responsibilities for rent and food, she didn't take it seriously. A year ago, my parents demanded rent from her for living in the house. Initially, she freaked out and called them mean and greedy, but when Dad threatened to throw her out, she agreed to pay rent. In 1 year, she had paid only for 3 months. Every month, she would pull up some new reason from her sleeve for not paying rent. After my parents returned from the trip, as expected, she blew up. My parents tried to calm her down. They brought gifts from her from the trip, but she threw them away right in their face. My dad was like, "Enough of this entitlement. Pack your bags and I'm going to drop you out." Her demeanor changed immediately. She started sobbing and hugging Mom, saying she was behaving like this because she missed them and was hurt that we left her alone. My mom said she had called this upon herself because we didn't intend to leave her. Her narcissistic behavior forced us to drop her. She put up a crying act and said she can't live without them and promised to pay the rent every month. My parents had already given her enough time to mend her ways, but she continued her narcissistic self, so this time they didn't give in to her manipulations and moved her out. My parents should have pulled the strings much earlier. I mean, she's 24 and doesn't have a proper job or any plans for her future. She's still on our parents' insurance and drives their car. My dad scouted a small apartment for her and even paid 2 months' rent. I didn't like the way she was served everything on a silver platter, but this was still better than letting her live in their house for free. They were still concerned about her well-being, but moving her out was the best thing to make her self-reliant. Little did they know that she was a tough nut to crack. My mom called me a week ago and gave me the remaining updates about Bonnie. So, 2 months' rent was covered by my dad. While she was leaving, my mom gave her some ready-to-eat food and snacks that covered her for a week or so. After that, she often dropped by my parents and stayed up till dinner time. My mom had to offer her the food. She even started staying the night at my parents' every now and then. Initially, they put up with her thinking she was missing home, but when she continued to show up even after 3 or 4 months, they decided to confront her. Bonnie confessed she had defaulted on the rent, hence she was hiding from the landlord. So basically, she didn't pay any rent at all. The 2 months in which she lived in her apartment were on Dad's money. My mom asked her what she did do with her salary. She said she bought shoes to go to work. Wow. Mom offered to loan her some money to clear off her rent, but she insisted on letting her move back home. Mom asked Dad to intervene, and he put his foot down and said no, not anymore. He was done bailing her out, and now she was on her own. It was her life, and she had to take charge of it. She tried to guilt trip about how could they abandon her daughter and all that crap. Dad said her tactics were not going to work anymore, and she should stop bothering them. He even said that the next time she approached them for any help, they wouldn't answer the door. I feel this was slightly harsh of him to say this, but I can understand he also had her enough. Bonnie reached out to my brother for help. He said he was leading a hand-to-mouth life and could not help her financially. He asked her if she'd ask me for help. She said she won't do that because it would boost my ego and I would make her feel like a loser. Oh, surely I would, because she is a loser. Then she asked my brother to borrow money from me, saying he needed it for himself and then lend it to her. My brother was like, "I'm out of this crap show. You need the money, you ask him." She requested him not to tell me about this. He said he can't keep a secret. She turned bitter towards him and called him my bootlicker. She called him my pet who runs behind me for free meatloaf. I heard these stories with a pinch of salt. Her entitled behavior had touched the roof. Someone had to call her out. I'm glad that I was the first one to call out her BS and cut her off of the trip. I still remember how my parents reached to it and how they gaslighted the situation, demanding to include Bonnie. I'm glad my parents finally realized how toxic Bonnie was and how she was using her daughter card to manipulate them. That's it until now. Thanks for engaging in my post. If there's anything more to my sister's situation, I'll update the thread. After coming back from Hawaii, the fun apparently didn't end for Bonnie. Fast forward 3 months and surprise, surprise, Bonnie's room is vacant. Looks like she finally managed to get herself evicted from the parental palace. A whole year of dodging rent payments with excuses that probably range from the dog ate my checkbook to I spent it on necessary life upgrades, aka shoes. Classic. Props to your parents for finally putting their foot down. They gave her an apartment, paid 2 months' rent, and even provided snacks. If only they knew they were setting up the ultimate freeloading headquarters. Bonnie turning their house into her personal restaurant and hotel was the cherry on top. Avoiding the landlord by hiding at your parents' place? That's some serious dedication to the art of freeloading. You were the first to see through the act, OP. Your parents finally caught on, even if it took some serious drama. It's a tough love lesson, but necessary. Here's hoping Bonnie eventually gets her act together. Though I won't hold my breath. Sister kicked me out of parents' house, so I stopped the house mortgage. They're now on the streets. I'm 33 female, single mom of a 5-year-old daughter. I've been separated from my husband after my delivery because he cheated on me during pregnancy and the postpartum period. That's another story. We'll share that in some later post. So I kicked him out of my life and moved in with my parents. 2 days back, I came back from work to find my younger sister, Ava, a 29 female, sitting with her heavily pregnant belly. She had moved to Croatia with her husband after their marriage. I was happy because she had been nothing but evil to me. She never liked me. There was no particular reason for her hatred, but she considered herself superior to me. She would manipulate our parents against me, and being the younger one, she would get away with her nuisance. Though she's younger than me, she is big and strong while I'm petite and lean. If she grabbed my wrist, there was no way I would be able to free myself. Anyone who would see us can tell that I can never fight her physically, yet my parents never believed me when I complained that she had beaten me. They would say, "She's your small sister. How could she beat you?" So, I remained distant from her. I even avoided talking to her unless it was absolutely necessary. Luckily, I got the chance to move out for high school, and it was such a relief. Now that monster is back in my life. Seeing her pregnant, I thought she was here for her postpartum period. I asked Mom how long she was going to stay. Ava heard me and shouted right from the living room, "I'm here to stay. Do you have a problem with that?" God, she hasn't changed a bit. She's still that narcissistic self. Mom told me that Ava's husband has got a transfer back to the States. He has got an accommodation from the company, but since Ava is pregnant, they think living with our parents is best for her. They can take care of her during pregnancy and after childbirth. I asked Mom if she had time to take care of her child. She meekly replied, "Yeah, I have to. Ava is still so young. How could she raise her child alone? She needs help." I was lost for words. Like, really? Ava is 29 and she can't raise her child on her own? I was 27 when I delivered a baby. I handled my postpartum alone because my husband was busy effing his whore. My mom also didn't come to help me. She said I should learn to raise a child. It's a part of motherhood. Now when her golden child is pregnant, she's ready to become a nanny for her. Such a hypocrite. Their favoritism has always been evident. That's the reason I have always kept my distance. When I got separated from my husband, I rented a house and didn't come to live with my parents. But Dad insisted I live with them. He said their house is too big for two of them, and besides, they would be here to watch over my daughter when I go out for work or so. He said instead of paying rent for a separate house, I could live with them and pay rent to them. It seemed like a fair deal to me. Moreover, I was going through a lot of emotional turmoil to think straight. Pregnancy, postpartum, husband's adultery, divorce, ugh. So when my dad offered support, I rushed to grab it. I moved in with them. I didn't face any such problems living with them, just that the support which he promised to watch over my daughter got faltered. It was only a few times that Mom agreed to babysit my daughter. I had to call a nanny most of the time. She said she can't babysit full time, so I should hire a nanny while she can keep an eye on if the nanny was doing her job properly. She wanted to take the role of baby monitor. I thought it was better to have Mom around than leave my daughter alone with a stranger, so I had a full-time nanny as well. It's so disheartening to see how Mom is circling around my sister to provide her with food, meds, and supplements. She never did that to me. In my 9 months of pregnancy, she barely visited me 2 or 3 times and only once after my delivery. Ever since I got to know that Ava is going to stay here, I have an eerie feeling that they are up to something. I mean, how could they agree to let Ava move in permanently? We don't have that big of a house to let them in. I'm happy to move out, but my daughter is too small to be left alone without any supervision. Though my mom doesn't babysit her exclusively, yet I feel safe to have her around. If I move out, I'd always have to have a babysitter at home, and that too, I don't know how safe it is to leave a kid to a babysitter. I know I'm a clingy mom, but hey, I'm a single mother. The only hope of my life is my daughter. I know I tend to be overprotective about her, but what should I do? She's my lifeline. Oh boy, OP. You thought your sister was gone for good, but surprise, she's back, and this time with a side of hormones and a bun in the oven. And your parents' sudden shift from tough love to full-service parenting when it comes to her is enough to make your head spin faster than a tilt-a-whirl. She's receiving the red carpet treatment, while you are left to navigate your own struggles alone, and that's beyond unfair, unjust, and disheartening. No one should have to navigate the trials of life alone, especially when it comes to family. And yet, here you are, facing the storm while others seem to have found shelter in the arms of privilege and favoritism. But hey, at least you've got your little sidekick, your daughter, to keep you sane through all the madness. In a world where even your own flesh and blood seem to have turned against you, she's the one shining light in the dark. Holding on to her, clinging to that lifeline, suddenly becomes the only thing that makes sense in this topsy-turvy world. Update 1. Thanks all for the advice. It helped me calm down my nerves. My most dreadful thought came to be true. 2 days after my post, I came home from work to find my stuff being packed and kept on the front porch, and my daughter sitting by it. I asked her who did this, and she said that Aunt had packed everything and made her sit there. My daughter is a quiet and well-mannered child. Poor girl has been sitting there for hours waiting for me. I asked her where was Grandpa and Grandma. She didn't say anything. She just hugged me and said she had been waiting for me to come back because she was so horrified of Aunt Ava. I asked her if Ava harmed her or scolded her. She sobbed and said that Aunt was yelling something which she didn't understand, and the way she was thrashing all my belongings, my daughter felt threatened. I stormed inside my room, yelling at Ava for an explanation. She said, "Do you want to mess with a pregnant woman? I can call the cops on you for harassing me. You know I can do it, don't you?" I gave back, saying that I can also call the cops on you for harassing my daughter in my absence. She laughed and said, "Do you have any evidence? Mom was here when I packed your stuff. You know whose side is Mom gonna take, don't you?" With that statement, I understood it was futile to talk to her. I called out Mom, but there was no response from her. She was home, but had locked her room. Ava's evil laugh made it clear that they were all ganged up against me. Ava smirked at my helplessness and said, "Take a hint, you dumbass.
No one wants you here. We packed for you and made it easier for you. Can't you see I'm pregnant and I need space? Me and my child are going to stay here. Now, get your lazy butt moving."
I said I'm not going anywhere. I'm not living here for free like you. I pay rent. Before I could say more, she charged at me the way she used to do as a child.
"You pay rent? Do you have a receipt or lease paper? No, that's right. How long are you going to be a bum and suck on my parents' money? Such a loser. That's why your husband found peace in another woman's bed, because you're useless. Disappear now if you don't want to get punched in front of your daughter."
My daughter ran towards me and hugged me. She was petrified with all the shouting and chaos. So I loaded my car with my belongings and left with my daughter. There was nothing left to be discussed. My parents were spineless in front of her. She wasn't lying when she said that Mom was there when she packed. In fact, Mom and Dad would have helped her pack my stuff. She's 7 months pregnant, and there's no way she would have been able to lift or drag my wardrobe and heavy suitcases without their help. They are all in this together. Her husband has a decent job, and they can easily afford to have their separate house. Still, she came behind me and chased me out. She's adamant to make my life miserable. She let her husband live alone at his company's flat while she's here busy troubling me. I don't know what wrong I did to her that she treats me this way, and even my parents do not speak a word against her. I checked into a hotel for a week and searched for a place to live. It was very difficult to manage work and house hunting. Finding a house in a week's time is so impossible. One of my colleagues was looking for a flatmate. I requested her to let me in. No one wants a flatmate with a baby, but I assured her that my daughter won't disturb her and I would move out as soon as I find a place. She was kind to let me in. I've been living with her for 2 weeks now. I have found a place within my means and within the circumference of my workplace and my daughter's daycare by the existing tenant, which would take another month to vacate. I have made the bookings already, just waiting for it to get vacated. It's almost 3 weeks since I moved out, or rather, kicked out of my house. My daughter still trembles with fear that Aunt Ava would come hunting for us and harm us. My poor little girl is not able to describe what exactly Ava had done to her, but she sobs when Aunt was just yelling at her and staring at her with wide eyes and threatening to hit her if she cried. She still sobs and wets her bed fearing Ava. I don't know how I can make her forget that incident. I feel so helpless to see her getting sad, remembering about that day. I still can't fathom how unsafe my daughter would have felt that day. She was traumatized in my absence. That witch is about to be a mother, yet she has no empathy for a child. I'm never going to forgive her, and if I get any opportunity to take my revenge, I'm going to crush her. I'm truly sorry to hear about the ordeal you and your daughter have been through, OP. No one deserves to be treated with such callousness, especially within their own family. It's heartbreaking to witness the fear and trauma your daughter experienced at the hands of someone who would have offered love and protection. Your sister's actions, coupled with your parents' silence and complicity, paint a distressing picture of betrayal and abandonment. It's clear that their allegiance lies with her, regardless of the harm she inflicts upon you and your daughter. It's a bitter pill to swallow, realizing that those who should have been your pillars of support have instead turned their backs on you. Leaving that toxic environment was undoubtedly the right decision, despite the challenges it presented. Your strength and resilience in finding temporary shelter and securing a new place for you and your daughter are commendable. Your determination to create a safe and stable environment for her speaks volumes about your character as a loving and devoted mother. Despite her attempts to assert dominance through intimidation and manipulation, Ava's reign of terror will eventually crumble under the weight of her own misdeeds. The universe has a way of balancing the scales, and those who inflict pain and suffering upon others will inevitably face their own reckoning. Update 2. So I was looking for an opportunity, and I got one. Like I mentioned, I was paying rent for living at my parents' house. Over the last 1 year, Dad asked me to pay $5,000 extra on top of the rent, which he would return to me later. I agreed to help him out. I didn't know he was using my rent money and that extra $5,000 to pay the mortgage. Now that I have moved out, I didn't pay the rent and that extra amount. Dad called me up on the 10th of this month in a panic mode. "Why have you not transferred the money this month?" "I got the message from the bank that the auto debit had failed due to insufficient balance." It made me crack up. He was so sure that I would pay the rent even after moving out that he didn't even check his account balance and keep the emergency funds. I said, "Hello, I no longer live at your house. Your golden child kicked me out, remember? So why should I pay rent?" He remained silent for a moment and he said, "How am I going to pay the mortgage? I don't make enough money now. The sales at my store have dwindled. Whatever little I make, I use that to run the house errands. I was using the rent money and that extra $5,000 to pay the mortgage." I said, "That's not my problem. I don't owe you anything. I paid for my stay and bought my own food. Ask your narcissistic daughter to help you out. I'm sure she would." I hung up the call. Within an hour, I got a call from my mom. She said, "Your dad is struggling to pay the mortgage, and instead of helping him, you're hanging up on him. Did you forget how we stood by you when your loser husband left you? This is how you pay back? Swallow your shallow pride and transfer the money you've been sending every month." I replied, Do you even hear yourself? You let me live in your house because I paid rent, and you used that for a mortgage. I hired a babysitter whenever I needed a helping hand. You didn't pitch in. What kind of support you're talking about? She realized that I was not going to stand and take it as I used to as a child. Now, I know how to give back. She mellowed down.
She was like, "Babe, Ava is pregnant. She needs more space. That's why she requested you to temporarily move out. Nothing to get bitter about this."
I said, "Excuse me? She didn't request me. She threw me out while you all chose to shut your eyes and mouth. She tortured my daughter, and I can never forgive you for all that." She further tried to defend her entitled daughter by saying,
"She's a little immature. You shouldn't mind her words. You're the older one and wiser. You be the bigger person and forgive her and send us the money."
Ha! It's all about the money. I chuckled and said, "I'm no longer the weak doormat that you all could push over. You guys always forced her over me, and by letting her harass my daughter, you all have crossed all the limits of sanity. I never wanted to stay with you all, but still stayed because I feared leaving my daughter alone to a nanny. But now, my daughter feels threatened more by you guys than a stranger." She started sobbing and apologizing. I cut her off and said, "I'm done getting manipulated by crocodile tears. I'm not going to give a penny," and they stopped bothering me. They didn't call me after that. It's been a month since then. I think they are managing the mortgage by their own, or their golden daughter is helping them through it. I don't care what's happening in their life. I'm happy in my small, cozy home with my daughter. I have hired a nanny who looks after her after play school. The nanny is a middle-aged woman who has a son 5 years elder to my daughter. She brings her son along to play with my daughter. They have a good time together. It feels so blissful to come home to a happy and loving daughter. Life does get better. We just need to hang in there. Looks like Daddy Dearest got a taste of his own medicine, served up with a side of financial panic. Who knew that his little rent scam would come back to bite him in the wallet? I mean, seriously, using your rent money to pay the mortgage without even giving you a heads up? That's some next level shady business right there. And then having the audacity to panic when the cash cow suddenly dries up? Classic. Props to you, OP, for not falling for their guilt trip. You've come a long way from being the doormat they used to wipe their feet on. And as for your mom's attempt at playing the sympathy card, please. We all know it's not about forgiveness. It's about the green stuff. But you shut that down real quick, didn't you? No more crocodile tears. No more empty apologies. Update 3. Hello all. First of all, thanks for all the love and support. It means a lot to me. And second, sorry for not updating this thread often. 2 reasons for this. 1, had no relevant update to post. I cut off all ties with the parents and narcissistic sister. 2, was too busy in life. I got promoted this year. Yay! But it comes with extra responsibility. Of course, extra pay too. So got caught up with work and motherly dues. But I got an interesting update this time. Last week, Mom and Dad showed up at my work. They didn't know where I lived, so they showed up at my workplace. I told the security to ask them to leave because I was too busy to meet anyone. I could see from the window blinds that they were arguing with the security and not ready to leave. They looked fragile, and it seemed that they had aged by at least 10 years in just a year. Mom was carrying an infant in her arms. I guessed it was Ava's child. It got me curious, and I went out to meet them. They started sobbing on seeing me. They came to me as their last hope to save the house. Dad said he could not pay the house mortgage for the last 7 or 8 months. Whatever savings he had, he used it to pay for the initial 2 to 3 months after I left. The bank gave them enough time to pay the money, but they kept defaulting. Last month, the bank kicked them out of the house and has put up the house for sale. They have been living in a dingy apartment since then. They came to me to help them save their house. I listened to them patiently and asked them why their entitled daughter didn't help them. They lowered their face and said, "Her husband had kicked her out of the house because he found her cheating on him, and even the baby was not his. All the transfer stories and the company's accommodation were a lie. Her husband is still in Croatia, and their divorce is on the way." I was shocked to hear this. I said, "Even after this, you guys supported her?" Mom cried and said, "We didn't know about this. She didn't tell us. She said she was here for the delivery, but after you moved out and we asked her to help us with the mortgage, the truth came out." I was like, "What did you do after knowing the truth? Hugged her and cried? You clearly supported her. That's why you're holding her child in your arms." They were like,
"How could we leave her in that condition? She had nowhere to go. We dried up all of our savings to pay for her medical bills."
Their condition indeed seemed very pathetic. I remained silent, thinking what to do. Without thinking anything, I asked where was Ava? At work? Mom was murmuring something, but Dad gave her a look and said, "She's at home. She refuses to go to work." Mom interrupted him and said, "How could she leave such a small baby and go to work?" I laughed and said, "Really, Mom? You're still supporting her? Her baby must be 7 to 8 months old. Women all over the world go back to work leaving their 6-month-old babies at home, and Ava is no different. And given the condition she is in, She should have taken a job much earlier. They further pleaded with me for help. I said I didn't have that much money to save their house. Dad said that if I could pay for the defaulted months, he could request the manager to stop the sale of the house and we could continue the remaining payments in monthly EMIs. I said I don't have that much money. I have used up my savings to pay the deposit on my house lease and for the admission of my daughter into elementary school. My mom made faces at my answer. I said, Mom, instead of making faces, try and understand that I'm a single mom taking care of myself and my daughter all by myself. After they left, I was feeling very low. My manager asked me about it. She saw me missing at my desk for over an hour. I discussed the matter with her and she gave me an idea. I called up Dad and said I was ready to pay the piled up mortgage and also the remaining ones, but that needs to transfer the house to my name. My manager suggested that I buy the house. With my promotion and raise, I should be able to afford the mortgage. Since I have already helped them with the mortgage for so many years and now helping them save the house, it should be a fair deal for them. In return, I would let them live in the house but without their low-life daughter. Dad remained silent and said he would like to discuss that with Mom and let me know. I said, take your time. Not sure if you guys have enough. It's been a week since then, but they have not called me. It is an answer that they don't agree with my proposal. They are okay with seeing their house getting sold off and living in a shady apartment, but not letting go of their golden child and living comfortably. Good for them. They made their choices, and now they'll have to live by it. Today, while driving back from work, I thought of driving by my parents' house to see if the sale board was up, but I brushed off the thought. I decided to cut them off of my life a year ago and would continue to do so. I don't want them back in my life. I'm happy and content living with my daughter and seeing her grow and achieve new milestones. She's now in elementary school and I couldn't be more proud. Ah, sweet, sweet karma. Who would have thought that their little scheme of using your rent money to play mortgage roulette would backfire so spectacularly? Your sister's cheating scandal, the bank repossessing the house, and your parents left high and dry in a dingy apartment. It's like the universe decided to hit the reset button on their entitled little world. And the best part? Despite all their sob stories and pleas for help, they still can't seem to let go of their precious golden child. It's like they're willing to sacrifice their own comfort and security just to coddle her fragile ego. But hey, props to you for not getting sucked back into their drama vortex. You've got your own life to live, complete with promotions, raises, and a wonderful daughter who's taking on elementary school like a boss. Who needs toxic family dynamics when you've got your own little slice of happiness? So here's to cutting out the dead weight and focusing on what truly matters, OP. Your own well-being and the bright future you're building for yourself and your daughter. Mom threatened to disown me if I didn't make brother a partner in my business. I stopped paying her mortgage and car loan. Have you ever heard what they say? Don't mix business and family? Well, I don't know who they are, but they must have been burned a few times too many, just like me, because they're dang right. I, 43 male, built a business for myself from the ground up. It wasn't easy because I came from a tough background. My mom, 58 female, had me when she was just a teenager, and my dad split when he heard I was on the way. Her parents were ashamed to have a pregnant teenage daughter and turned her out, so she had to fend for herself. So for the first 17 years of my own life, we were dirt poor. No, we weren't just poor. We were in poverty. Everything changed when I started working. It wasn't immediate. At first, I took any job I could, just to get food on our bellies, or keep a roof over our heads. Back then, I could work as many as 3 or 4 jobs at a time. I still had the endless energy of youth, and the fear of going hungry was a great motivator. It was at one of these jobs that I met Arnold, a man who inspired me with his business acumen. I looked up to him because he had come from the dirt like me, and now he was more successful than I could ever imagine. And he took a liking to me because I was a clever kid with a lot of ambition. So he became my mentor. He watched my progress closely and gave me advice and opportunities to observe how he did business. When I was about 20 years old, I felt I'd learned enough and I presented him with a business idea that I had. Arnold believed in me and my idea, and he invested in my business. With his advice and backing, I was slowly able to grow that one business into the chain of businesses I own today. Arnold isn't around anymore, but I thank him every day for the way he changed my life. That brings us to my brother, Nick, 40 male. He's my half-brother with yet another unknown father, but I always just call him my brother. Nick is not the ambitious type. He seemed to accept our lot in life and spent his teenage and young adult years getting into trouble with his peers. Back when I was starting to work with Arnold, I tried to introduce them. I hoped he would be able to learn from him and make positive changes in his life like I had. Nick didn't take it seriously, which disappointed me. He said Arnold was full of himself, and Arnold hadn't been too impressed with Nick either. That didn't stop me from trying to get my brother to take his future more seriously. I tried to get my brother in on my business while it was still growing. Arnold had disapproved and threatened to pull his investment, but I insisted. He was my brother, and I wanted both of us to rise out of our poor background together. He understood and relented, though he still thought it was a bad idea. Nick put in the work for exactly one day and then disappeared when he found out he wouldn't be earning a paycheck. I told him that he would be earning from our profits, but he said he preferred the certainty of a paycheck. He went back to his job at a local factory after that, and no amount of pleading would persuade him. Why am I digging up all these stories from almost 30 years ago? Because it's all the background for what happened a few days ago. My mom asked me to come over and told me that Nicky, as she calls him, wasn't doing good. He was struggling financially, and he'd had to move in with her recently. I wasn't surprised. Nick was usually going through tough times, and he'd always bounce back to Mom during those times. I was expecting her to ask me for some money to help, as usual, but what she said next shocked me. She told me about Nick's difficulty holding down a stable job, which I already knew all too well. Then she asked me to make him a partner in my business. I didn't believe I heard her right at first. She said that the jobs I'd given him in the past were too low for him, and that's why he'd never stuck around. According to her, it was embarrassing for the founder's brother to work as a lowly manager. God knows I've tried countless times to help Nick. I've offered him jobs at my companies and even offered to train him for a managerial position, with the promise that he could move higher as he gained experience. Each time he would show up for a couple of days and disappear without a word. Eventually, I simply stopped trying. You can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. I explained that I couldn't just give Nick a high position like that. He lacked work ethic and wasn't qualified. I was prepared to start him off low and promote him as he gained experience and proved himself, but making him a partner was out of the question. I'd spent more than 20 years building this company up from nothing. There was no way I was just going to hand over part ownership to my business to him.
But he's your brother,
my mom said, as if that meant he was entitled to decades of my hard work. I agreed that he was my brother, and I cared about him too, which is why I'd tried to get him in on the business when I was just starting. It was why I'd given him so many chances, which he'd thrown away each time. I was done giving him chances. I asked how much he needed from me, and my mom snapped.
We don't want your handouts.
She then said that ever since I became successful, I'd been using my money as a tool to control both of them. She said I just gave them enough money to get by so that they'd be forced to come crawling back to me when they needed more. She accused me of not wanting my brother to be a partner to keep him from being financially independent. I couldn't believe my ears. Did she think I liked having to provide for both of them? Nick was a grown man who couldn't hold down a job and drank and gambled away whatever money he had. My mom was an older woman who honestly wasn't much older than me, but I still made sure she was comfortable. I paid the mortgage for the home where she lived, where Nick lived more often than not. I also handled her car note and sent her some money monthly for essentials and utilities. That usually came out to thousands of dollars a month, just to keep her happy. I wasn't trying to control anyone. I was trying to help them. I told her that I had been more than generous. I wasn't trying to control anyone. I'd given Nick more than enough chances, and he threw them in my face each time. I pointed out that I wasn't running a hot dog stand. I ran a business that has locations across the country. Making Nick a partner wouldn't help him or my company. With his lack of knowledge and experience, he would run my business into the ground, ruining things for me and several employees who relied on me. It would be the worst business decision I could ever make. My mom gave me a glare I hadn't seen since I was a child. She said family was what mattered most, but I cared more about employees who had nothing to do with me. I told her she was twisting my words, but she ignored me and said we all struggled together, and that my success should be their success. Her words were starting to reek of entitlement, and it was annoying me. I explained that we had struggled together as a family, but I was the only one that had struggled to build this business. I agreed the family was important, but my business was my own. They had no say in any decisions regarding it. I also added that she needed to stop enabling Nick so he could learn to stand on his own 2 feet. My mom wasn't hearing me out, though. She screamed at me and said that I didn't want to see my family succeed and that they didn't need me. Then she gave me an ultimatum. Either I make my brother a partner in my company, or she would disown me. I honestly wanted to laugh because I thought it was a bad joke, but she was dead serious. I asked if she would actually disown me because I didn't hand my brother something he didn't deserve. She said she would, and that I didn't deserve to be part of this family if I didn't commit to our collective success. Now I let my frustrations show. I told my mom that she didn't care about Nick's success. She just felt entitled to everything I had built. I said that if she thought that disowning me was the best course of action, then I wouldn't argue with her. She shouted that she never wanted to see me again, and I stormed out of her house. It's been a few days now, and I can't get that fight out of my head. I keep replaying the conversation, trying to make sense of it. The entitlement and ingratitude just set me off. Did I really not do enough for my brother? I worked my butt off to get where I was, to pull our entire family out of the mud, and instead of being proud of me, they're trying to leech off my success. It's too much for me to think about right now, so that's why I decided to write everything out. I hoped putting the whole mess into words would give me some perspective, but I'm still just as confused and hurt as before. Look, you can't force someone to be a partner in a company just because they share your DNA. If Nick thinks working for a paycheck is beneath him, then he can keep chasing the thrill of living the dream. Ultimately, you have to do what's best for your business and your own peace of mind. If that means setting boundaries, so be it. It's okay to prioritize your hard work and achievements over family pressure, especially when that pressure feels unfair. Update. I didn't jump to any rash decisions about how I would move forward with the situation with my mom and my brother. It's always been a principle of mine, both in business and in my personal life, not to make important decisions when I'm emotional. It's always worked out for me so far, and I was sure it wouldn't fail me here. I think a week passed before I realized that I couldn't emotionally detach myself from the decision completely. It had to do with my family, and you can never completely separate emotions from family. So I did something I rarely do. I asked for advice from a trusted friend. He was a fellow business owner, and he'd also gone through some complicated family stuff a few years back. I figured that he would be able to give me an unbiased opinion. We met up to have some drinks one evening, and I told him everything. He knew about my family background and Nick's struggles, so I just told him about the conversation with my mom and the ultimatum she had given me. He said pretty much the same thing as the comments in my original post. My mom was pushing way past her boundaries, and Nick was looking to me as a safety net. He said he knew it would be painful, but I should enforce boundaries. If that meant I should refuse to give in to my mom's ultimatum, then so be it. That was tough to hear. I did love my mother and my brother, but he was right. I wasn't going to be used. If my mom wanted to disown me because I wouldn't bend over to unreasonable demands, then I was no longer her son. My mom called me a few days after that and asked me if I'd come to a decision. I simply replied that she had made the decision herself, and I was going to respect it. She started to shout at me again and call me names. I got ingrate and worthless before I hung up and blocked her number. I was going to cut ties with my family, but not before showing them what it really meant to kick me out of the family. I made some calls to stop the automatic payments on my mom's mortgage and car note. I didn't bother to notify her. She'd find out soon enough when they started blowing up her phone and mail with late notices. It took about a month before my mom found out what was up. I had already blocked her number, so she couldn't call me. Instead, I got home one day to find her sitting on my front doorstep. I braced myself for another barrage of shouting and insults as I approached, but it didn't come. She simply said, "Hi," like the last fight hadn't happened, and then she asked me how I had been. I just crossed my arms and looked at her and said, "What are you doing here?" She frowned and asked me what I meant by that. I told her that I wasn't expecting to see her anywhere around my house since she didn't want anything to do with me anymore. She surprised me by laughing and putting her hand on my shoulder.
"That didn't mean anything. You know people say things they don't mean when they're emotional."
I said I didn't know that. I was raised to say what I mean at all times, even when I'm angry. She didn't like me using her own words against her. She told me to stop being petty and said that I needed to be mature. I could see another fight was brewing, and I didn't want to deal with that at the end of a hard day. So I walked past her and unlocked my door. She tried to follow me in, but I just shut the door in front of her and locked it behind me. She tried the door, and when she noticed it was locked, she started shaking the door violently. I shouted at her not to break the door, but she didn't listen. She just kept shouting at me to open the door immediately. I sat on the floor in the hallway, listening to my mother have a minor breakdown. It wasn't pleasant to her, but part of me was glad to think that she might be learning her lesson. I'm not just a meal ticket that can be treated however you like. I think she realized that I was not going to respond to threats and shouting because she eventually stopped shaking the door and lowered her voice. She finally came out with it and asked what was going to happen to her mortgage and car note. I considered not answering and pretending that I had gone deeper inside the house, but I decided against it. She was already here, so there was no point shelving this confrontation for another day. I told her that her son was paying for those, and I was no longer her son. She had another one who could pick up from where I'd left off. She was silent for so long that I thought she'd left. When I looked through the peephole, she was still there, though. Eventually, she said that Nick wasn't capable of paying for either of them. I told her that it wasn't my problem. I got a headache around this time, so I just went up to my room to take an aspirin and hoped she would be gone by the time I was back. Fortunately, she was nowhere to be found when I returned later. I had some peace for a few days after that. I thought my mom had finally gotten the hint until she showed up with my brother. This time they caught up with me in the parking lot of my office building. Nick looked about the same as last time I saw him. He was poorly groomed and looked like he needed a few good meals. Life hadn't been good to him. I felt bad for him for a moment, but I remembered how many times I'd tried to help him get his life on track, through jobs and cash, and how he'd squandered them each time. I couldn't think of a meaningful way to help him. I could give him $1 million today and it would be gone in 2 months. How do you help someone like that? Nick got in my face immediately and accused me of abandoning our mom. It was a few minutes after noon, and I could smell the alcohol in his breath already. I told him she had disowned me, and I said he should get out of my way. He grabbed my shirt and tried to shake me, but he didn't have much luck. We're about the same height, but I take good care of my body. I hit the gym at least 3 times a week and play squash on weekends. He, on the other hand, is thin and was already a few drinks deep. He couldn't move me, and I don't know why he thought sucker punching me would be a good idea. As is the goal with a sucker punch, he caught me by surprise. I stumbled back a bit while he laughed. I hit him back and put him on his butt. My mom screamed and put herself between us, but I noticed she was holding her arms out to protect Nick. Maybe because she knew he was the one in more danger if we got in a fight, or because she had picked his side. I just wiped the blood from my lip and tried to straighten my shirt. I never want to see the two of you here again, unless you're coming with an apology. You've made your decision, and now you have to live with it. I'm not going to be held responsible for either of your bad decisions anymore. My mom started crying and begging me, but I was done. They were both adults, and I'd done my dues for them over and over again. I'd actively tried to improve my brother's life and had paid thousands of dollars a month for my mom to have a comfortable life, and they repaid me by excluding me and then ambushing me and assaulting me. I told them I was through with them and that I would call the police if I ever saw one of them on my property again, either home or business. My mom stood there crying, but the mention of police scared Nick, and he started trying to drag my mom away. It's been a few weeks since then, and I haven't heard from my mom. I received a few notifications about the canceled payments and a threat of foreclosure. I'm expecting a similar threat for repossession of the car any day now. Nick came around to my house one day, holding up both his hands as a sign of peace. I decided not to call the police yet, and just hear him out. He looked better than the last time I'd seen him. He was sober, and it seemed like he was making more of an effort to take care of himself, though he looked tired and unhappy. He didn't beg for forgiveness or anything. He just said he was scared of our mom ending up homeless when the house was foreclosed. I told him that I wasn't going back on my position. To my surprise, he said he understood, and just asked for help getting her to a place to live when she was kicked out. I told him that I'd cover 6 months of rent for a small apartment for her, but after that, they were on their own. Part of me felt weak for offering even that much to help them, but I told myself that this was the last bit of help they'd be receiving from me and that it was being offered entirely on my terms. Maybe one day I'll get back in touch with my family if they manage to stand on their feet and learn to respect boundaries, because no matter what, there's always going to be a soft spot for family. But until then, I'll focus on my business knowing that I've done my best for them and they threw it in my face. It's hard to see someone you love react so negatively, but it's essential to remember that you're not responsible for her reactions or choices. By blocking her number and stopping the automatic payments, you've made it clear that you're not willing to tolerate disrespect anymore. Your decision to provide some financial support for a limited time shows that you're still willing to help, but you're doing it on your own terms, which is a healthy boundary. Focusing on your business and your own well-being is a fantastic choice. Stay strong and trust that you're on the right path, OP. Husband's nephew called me a slut. We cut them off the college tuition we'd been funding. I, 39 female, have been married to my husband Nick, 42 male, for 15 plus years. It has been a very peaceful ride for me. The only trouble we had was because of our infertility. Due to a medical condition, we couldn't conceive. It was shattering because we badly wanted to have one. The adoption law is very tedious in our state. We also have a demanding job, so my husband and I decided not to go for the adoption. It doesn't make sense to adopt a baby and then don't give them time. So instead, we decided to help the needy children and also take up the responsibility of funding the education of our sister-in-law's kids. However, a recent incident has made me question this decision and reconsider funding them because of their entitled behavior. A little backstory. Sister-in-law got divorced when her kids were small, and since then, she has been struggling to make ends meet. Her husband was abusive and alcoholic. The child support that she received was also the bare minimum because of his low income. She works 2 jobs, yet her limited income makes it difficult for her to cover the expenses of their education, which is why my husband and I decided to pitch in. Sister-in-law's 3 kids, Ava, 23 female, Ross, 20 male, and Rustin, 17 male, were once great kids. However, the boys had seemingly lost their way. But Ava, her daughter, is a total rock star. She graduated from college with distinction, has started her career at one of the most reputed MNCs, and is crushing it. Sister-in-law, and honestly all of us, couldn't have been prouder. She had always been the smart and sweet one, and it's amazing to see her thrive. Sadly, the same is not true for the boys. Ross and Rustin were also bright as kids, but as they entered their teenage years, they sort of lost their interest in studies, and now the situation has gotten so worse that I had to write a post about their evilness. So, it all started getting downhill when Ross graduated high school. We asked him about his course details so that we could plan the funding for his college tuition. He gave us a shocker that he didn't want to go to college and instead wanted us to give him the money in cash. My husband asked him what's his plan, and he said he wanted to start a business. Fair enough, but what business? Ross has no clear answer for that. He said he had something in mind, but nothing concrete. We said we don't want a blueprint right away, but at least we need to know what's the business idea he wanted to pursue. He gave a superficial brief that he wanted to start an online business. My husband and I were skeptical about investing in his venture because he wasn't clear in this idea, and also he had no business skills. We didn't decline his request right away, but asked him to give us some time to think it over. He said cool, but a few weeks later he started following up with us regarding the money as if we owed him. After a lot of to and fro, my husband and I told him clearly that we don't trust his business acumen and we won't be investing in it. He flipped out and threw tantrums. Not at us, but to sister-in-law and mother-in-law. His point was the college tuition we kept for him was anyways his money, so he should be allowed to do whatever he wanted with that. I didn't find logic in that entitlement. Yes, we took the responsibility of funding their education, and we do have the means to invest in them financially. But this doesn't mean they feel entitled to the handout. Mother-in-law tried to convince us to fund his business, but my husband said no, we don't trust his half-baked idea. Mother-in-law said that we're faltering in our commitment of supporting sister-in-law's children. My husband gave a clear statement that we would cheer for the success of his business, but not financially. At least not now, but at a later stage when we feel confident about it, we might pitch in. Also, we're ready to pay for his college tuition whenever he wants to go back to learning. There was no discussion after that, but I heard that mother-in-law was selling off her family heirlooms to fund Ross's business idea. God knows what happened after that, but Ross's business didn't see the daylight. Since then, we have been distant from them. Then spring came and he knocked on our door to apologize for his rudeness. He intended to go to college and wanted us to bear his tuition. We gave him a chance and he took admission, but since then his attitude has changed towards us. He gave us cold shoulders. Nothing very upfront but evident. Earlier, he used to be very friendly and chatty. Now it was just an exchange of pleasantries and that's it. 2 to 3 months back, it was Rustin's 17th birthday, the younger one. Sister-in-law invited us for dinner. It was going as usual. Ross also came over. As usual, he was silent with us. Anything we asked, he replied with a nod or single-word answer. But things took a turn when Rustin made a hurtful comment about me. He said, how could Nick, my husband, find me attractive when I'm mid and ugly? I stared at him with shock and disbelief. He then added that it's hard to believe how could anyone find me attractive. I just couldn't process it. Nick flipped out and questioned him about his comment. The worst part was before Nick freaked out, everyone else, mother-in-law, sister-in-law, and Rose, laughed at his comment as if it was some kind of joke. Only when Nick got angry did everyone stop laughing and mother-in-law downplayed it, saying he was just a kid and was being funny. Nick asked him to take his words back and apologize right away, but Rustin defended himself saying it was just a passing thought and he shared it with everyone to lighten up the mood. Nick got furious that commenting on someone's appearance is not a sense of humor. Rustin tried to further justify himself, but Nick stopped him in between and yelled, "Apologize now or face the consequence." The atmosphere turned silent. I was choking with embarrassment, anger, and hurt. Nick looked at sister-in-law for intervention, but instead of calling out Rustin for his disrespect, she said, "Calm down, Nick. People can have an opinion." Nick stood up from the table and said, "We're not having any conversation until all of you apologize to her, me." He patted me on my back and said, "Let's go." I stood up and mother-in-law held my hand and said, "It's his birthday. Let's not spoil the moment over a trivial matter. He's a child, but you're an adult, right? You should know how to handle this kind of criticism from kids." I shrugged off her hand and said, "He's not a kid, and even if he was, it's sister-in-law's responsibility to teach manners to her children, but she has clearly faltered." While we were having this conversation, I could see from the corner of my eye that Rustin and Ross exchanged looks and grinned. They clearly were enjoying the humiliation they caused me. I looked at them and said, "It's not funny. You guys are mean, and you will pay the price for your behavior." I left before anyone could react. A week after that incident, I came home to find sister-in-law and mother-in-law arguing with my husband. I entered the house, pretending they didn't exist, and went inside my room. Sister-in-law requested me to hear her out. Both of them apologized and said they scolded Rustin after we left, and he's guilty about his behavior. I said, "Okay, where is he? Why didn't I get any apology from him?" Sister-in-law said she was sorry on his behalf. The truth was, Rustin was too egotistical to apologize, but poor. They needed her money, hence sister-in-law took one for the team. Her apology was so superficial that it meant nothing to me. Their point was that Rustin is just a raging teenager and doesn't know his boundaries, hence he got swayed away in his humor. Sister-in-law and my mother-in-law were so rigid and would do anything to defend her boys, even though in the end she said she would discipline her kids, but her tone said otherwise. I said they better keep his emotions in check and it should be the last time they spoke to me in this manner. Since then, I've been keeping low-key. Despite the incident, we processed the next semester's fee for Ross. Fast forward to a week ago. We attended Nick's grandfather's 75th birthday. Mother-in-law, sister-in-law, and the 2 boys were also present. Ava couldn't make it because of her work. I was wearing a deep-necked dress. I like wearing off-shoulder and deep V-necks. The moment I exchanged glances with the boys, their looks made me uncomfortable. They were ogling on my cleavage. I felt so disgusting. I mean, they're half my age and they were staring at me like this, but I ignored it and continued to enjoy it with others. During the celebration, I raised a toast to Nick's grandfather. When I finished it, everyone cheered, except for those 2 boys who were smirking at each other. They were making me so uncomfortable that I wanted to leave the party immediately. After a while, I was passing by them. I sensed they said something and grinned while staring at me. It was no less than harassment. They were acting as Eve teasers. I had enough, so I decided to confront them right away. I stopped and asked them what's the matter. They were taken aback. I asked what's so funny about me that whenever they saw me, it made them laugh. They froze and fumbled for an answer. I said I wasn't a teenager who would get harassed by their behavior. Rustin got nervous and remained quiet. Ross spoke up and said they were just chilling out and their grin had nothing to do with me. I said they better watch their behavior instead of defending themselves. I turned back to leave without listening to him further. I was only 2 feet away when I heard Ross saying, "What a slut," and they both burst out in laughter. I immediately turned back and they stopped laughing and got awkward. I asked them, "What did you just say?" Rustin impulsively started apologizing. Sorry, it was not about you. We saw something on the phone." I saw Ross grabbing his wrist and Rustin stopped talking. Ross said, "We didn't say anything. What did you hear? Maybe the music is too loud and it gave you the perception that we said something." I lost my temper and yelled, "If you have guts, repeat what you just said." I was an inch closer to slapping him when Nick rushed into the situation. I told him what had happened and he lost his mind. By then, others also gathered, including mother-in-law and sister-in-law. Ross argued that he didn't say anything at all, and I was just making it up. I questioned him if they didn't say anything, then why did Rustin reply that it was not about you? Rustin changed his statement in front of everyone and said he impulsively said sorry because he thought I got offended by them for some reason. It made no sense. We had to defuse the matter for the sake of grandfather because he was getting anxious. We didn't want to spoil his big day. I stayed there until dinner. Nick was constantly by my side, but the rest of the evening was awkward. Sister-in-law and mother-in-law gave me weird looks. The next morning, I got a call from Ava. She got to know about the incident from someone and was sorry for me. She said I should have slapped him right away. She even suggested I cut them off completely, which is exactly my plan. I told Nick enough is enough. We need to stop fueling their entitlement. We can't have their back while they continue to be jerks. Nick is on the same page and said we should stop funding their education since they don't respect the value we're adding to their life. While I completely agree with what Nick has decided, a small part of me is worried about dooming their life by cutting off this support. What do you guys think you'd have done in my situation? As for cutting off their funding, sometimes the best way to teach a lesson is to let them live with the consequences of their own actions. You've been more than generous, and if they can't show basic respect, it's a clear sign that their sense of entitlement has reached new heights. You're absolutely right to question the value of continuing support when it's met with such behavior, OP. You're not dooming their lives. You're showing them that respect and gratitude are not optional. Update 1. Thank you, people, for validating our actions. So Nick and I decided to withdraw the financial support we've been lending. We were not on talking terms with them after that incident. Nick said, let them reach to us, then we'll break the news. We don't need them, they do. So we remained no contact with them. They too didn't reach out to us until they needed money. Rustin graduated from high school and wanted to get into a private design college that charges tuition in bombs. Look at their ego and audacity. Sister-in-law or Rustin didn't show up or called us. Rustin just emailed Nick the details of his college with the payment link. Like, wow. Nick royally ignored his email. Instead of calling or visiting us, he just topped up the email with a reminder for payment. What an entitled brat. Then, 2 weeks later, mother-in-law called Nick and said,
Honey, Rustin has been waiting on you for the payment for his college tuition. It seems you've missed reading his email.
Nick replied, Rustin? Who? I don't know him. She was silent for a minute, maybe confused with Nick's response. Then she said, Got it. You're still brooding over the trivial matter. Didn't the boys clear the misunderstanding? Your wife must have misheard the stuff. Nick was like, enough of BSing. We've taken a stand to cut them off completely. We don't know who they are and what they would do in life. We don't care. Mother-in-law tried to convince him, saying these conflicts shouldn't jeopardize their lives and that we should be forgiving and bigger people. Nick said, no thank you, and hung up. Within minutes, sister-in-law blew up his phone. He ignored her calls and she started texting him sorry messages. She said she would make the boys apologize in front of us, but we shouldn't deprive them of the education. Nick responded that it was too late. She should have woken up from her slumber long before. The next day, sister-in-law was at our door along with mother-in-law. Nick didn't entertain them, saying we don't welcome disrespectful people into our homes or our lives, so they better stay away from us. Sister-in-law started crying and said she and the boys were sorry about what happened and wanted another chance. Nick said if the boys are really sorry, why didn't they join you guys to apologize? Mother-in-law jumped in saying,
You know the boys are young and hormonal. They don't realize for consequences of their actions, but we adults do. We should be mindful of our actions. We cannot let them pay such a heavy price of their childish jokes. Their career, their life is at stake.
Her defensive tone boiled my blood, and I gave her the hearing of my life. I was like, calling your aunt a slut is not a childish joke. It is pure misogynistic. And then gaslighting it and proving me wrong in front of everyone was sheer evil. Commenting on my looks was tasteless and disrespectful. These would call for a consequence. You guys also play a role in it by enabling their behavior. I feel sorry that they would have to suffer because their mother did a terrible job in raising them. They're going to suffer for their whole life if they don't change their attitude, and no one but you, sister-in-law, would be responsible for that. They both turned bitter and looked at Nick for intervention, but he stood firm and asked them to leave. I slammed the door in their face. I don't know if this was right or wrong, but this is what I did. The same evening, Ava called me and lauded me for my stand. She said we should have taken this decision at the very first instance when Rustin commented about my looks. Her mother, sister-in-law, has called her a witch about me, but instead got schooled by Ava. Sister-in-law wanted Ava to fund for Rustin's college and for the remaining tuition of Ross, but Ava flipped out on her mother that she should stop babying her sons, and instead of defending them, she should hold them accountable for their mistakes and let them fend for themselves. Sister-in-law asked her to stop acting like my puppet and stand by her brothers. Ava said she has taken her stand and she doesn't want to be associated with people who slut-shame women. It made me wonder about sister-in-law's character. On one hand, she's begging us to forgive her sons and at the same time bad-mouthing me in front of others. She doesn't even care for her daughter. Ava has just begun her career. How could she take care of the education of her brothers? Why can't they take out a loan if they're so keen to study, which I highly doubt. Sometimes the only way to get people to understand the gravity of their actions is to hit them where it hurts, straighten their sense of entitlement. You and Nick are doing what you think is right. It might not feel great right now, but sometimes making a tough call is the only way to push for a real change. Update 2. Here's some new information. Let me begin by addressing a common question asked by my readers. A lot of you commented on why we even pitched in to fund these narcissistic children. Well, they were not evil as kids. All three of them were very diligent and well-mannered. Sister-in-law, though not very warm and friendly, was still civil to me. We took up the responsibility to shape their life for a better future. The eldest one, Ava, made the most of it, and now she's working at an MNC in Europe. But the boys lost their path, and sister-in-law didn't even try to bring them back to the track. So, after we cut them off financially, I got to hear a lot of crappy things they've been talking about me. They said I wore revealing dresses to compensate for my ugly face, that I'm infertile and useless, that I've manipulated Nick to cut his own family, and so on. I took it with a pinch of salt. Sister-in-law had been ripped off her piggy bank, so naturally she would talk trash about us. I was glad of my decision. 3 to 4 months passed by, and one day Nick got a call from mother-in-law. She was in panic mode. Ross and Rustin were detained by the cops because of their association with illegal drug activities. While Ross was arrested, Rustin was taken into safe custody for further investigation. Mother-in-law pleaded with Nick to bail them out and save their life. Nick hesitated for a while, but then it was a matter of their lives. Sister-in-law claimed that her sons were innocent and were made a scapegoat by their friends. Nick was not convinced that they were fully innocent, yet he gave the benefit of the doubt and headed to the police station to get the details. I didn't stop him from standing with his family, but I didn't accompany him. Sister-in-law and mother-in-law were also present at the station. The cops said it was a non-bailable offense and they had to appear in the court. Nick involved his lawyer to get the details. The truth came out and it exposed sister-in-law's golden sons. Ross was actually involved in the drug activities. He was running a racket of supplying these banned drugs to college students. In fact, he intended to expand his racket to high school students through Rustin. The younger one luckily escaped extensive grilling because he was a few months away from being 18. Sister-in-law requested Nick to hire a lawyer for Ross and get him out ASAP, but after knowing the truth, Nick refused to burn his money on him. He said let the attorney decide what's best for him. Thanks to sister-in-law's stars, Ross got away with a lighter punishment because he was a newbie and got swayed away by the veteran of the racket who lured him into the crime world. Ross was fascinated by the easy money it brought. The fee for bailing him out before the serving period was really high, and Nick refused to pitch in. After that, sister-in-law openly turned bitter against us. She evenly alleged that I falsely framed Ross into this to take my revenge. And guess what? Some of the dumb people believed her story. I could only laugh at them who think you can fool the cops and play with the law and order of the state. Sister-in-law didn't stop here. She even disowned Ava for standing up for me and not pitching in to pay bombs of money for Ross's bail. Currently, Rustin is released from correction home while Ross is serving his prison time. I'm not sure how their career in life would mold after this incident, but I wouldn't care less about it. Lately, mother-in-law visited Nick at his office and told him that she was disowning him because he abandoned his sister and his nephew when they were in their lowest. It broke his heart that his mother never appreciated anything we did for her and sister-in-law's children, never stood up for us, but she was quick to disown him when he refused to help her criminal grandson. We've learned this lesson the hard way, that you can give your life for someone, but if the person doesn't want to see your goodness, they won't see it. We intend to remain no contact with them for the foreseeable future. Despite the trouble with them, we will share and cherish a good bond with Ava, who has been nothing but loving and grateful to us. The situation with Ross and Rustin is a stark reminder of how sometimes, despite our best efforts, things can take a turn we never expected. Staying no contact is the right decision given the circumstances. It's a hard lesson to learn, but sometimes cutting ties is the only way to preserve your own well-being and sanity. The bond with Ava sounds like a bright spot amidst all the turmoil, and it's great to hear that she values and respects you both.
Sister stole my fiancé 15 years ago. Now she's offering me her husband because they're screwed. This is about my sister, Carol. Well, I'm going to call her by her real name because who cares? There's no better way of saying this, but yeah, Carol lured my fiancé into her skirts because she felt he was too handsome and rich for a plain-looking girl, me. She thought he deserved someone gorgeous, so she offered herself, and that dumbass Dick married her. Good for them, because I got rid of a cheater and found someone who actually deserved me. Hear me out. This is going to be a long one because it goes back from 15 years ago when I was in my mid-20s. Now I am 41. Carol is 6 years younger to me and a complete opposite personality. She's the girl who gets the most attention in all family and social gatherings, and she ensured that she got one. Right from our childhood, she was more focused on getting dressed up and hanging out with friends. No doubt, she's pretty and what you call dead-drop gorgeous, and she's proud of it. She leaves no opportunity to flaunt her superficial beauty and look down upon others who don't fit her beauty standard, like me. She was always critical of my dressing sense and made fun of my not-so-social nature. As a kid, I was more inclined towards academia, so I was mostly seen with my books and comics instead of putting makeup on my Barbie. I didn't even own a Barbie. Carol and I never shared a sisterly bond. She considered herself a fashionista while I was a plain-looking girl. That's what she called me, plain. Well, she was right. To an extent. I'm a simple woman, with no pomp and show, no over-the-top drama for attention. I'm calm and composed and like to be in my own space. Very early on, I left home from my high school and I couldn't be more relieved. Who wants to be around an entitled brat? Life was pretty much fun with my busy schedule in medical school. I used to visit home during holidays or spring break, and that too I kept my trip short. Things got straightened out with Carol as we had minimal encounters. Carol dropped out of high school to pursue a career in fashion. Later, she again dropped out of fashion school for a modeling career. Until I was in touch with her, she got 2 photo shoot projects for a local apparel brand in 5 years. I'm not sure if we can call this a successful modeling career, which she often refers to. If you think I'm mean, hold on. After I moved out of the house, the bitterness between Carol and me subsided. We met twice a year for a few days. She didn't get enough opportunity to piss me off, so we were cool. In my freshman year in college, I met Smith. He was quite senior to me. He was pursuing his master's while I was in freshman year for a bachelor's degree. Besides, he had a couple years of hands-on experience as a duty doctor. He was specializing as a heart specialist, one of the most reputed specializations. To add a cherry to the cake, he was handsome. He used to give lessons on the subject of the circulatory system to freshman students to earn some extra bucks and brush up his knowledge. He was popular for his simple teaching methods, more popular amongst the girls because, who doesn't want to take lessons from a blue-eyed, 6'2", lean, and well-bit university senior? I also took lessons from him and eventually we started dating. In my final year of college, he proposed to me. After dating him for 4 years, I had no reason to say no. He was already working at a hospital by then. During the holidays when I went home, Mom saw the ring on my finger and asked. In the happy moments of festivities, I told her everything. She jumped in excitement because it is not usual that I get serious with anyone. Smith was the first guy I ever dated or had sex with. Mom asked me the details about Smith because she sniffed our marriage on the cards. Carol often used to say that I'm never going to find a good man to marry me. By good, she meant rich and handsome. Whenever she got to know that I was seeing a guy, she would remark,
He's so gonna run away. Your relationship won't even last for a week.
So when Carol got to know about Smith, her eyes lit up and she wanted to know more about him. It was kind of unusual for her to take an interest in my life because it has always been very boring. I asked, why you want to know about him? She said,
He's gonna be family, so I should know him.
Mom asked me to call him for dinner on New Year's Eve. Later, I got to know that Carol had asked Mom to invite Smith. We didn't have any plans for that year, so Smith agreed to tag along. When we reached home, we were greeted by Carol. It was quite surprising because Carol is a party person. She's never seen home on weekends. On New Year's, she is off for a week-long party with her friends, but this time, she was at home. Quite surprising. Should have been alarming, right? But I didn't get bothered. I don't give a crap about others' life. I went home with Smith and my sister was floored by Smith. Her first comment was,
I thought you to be rich, but you're handsome too.
Her flirtatious gestures were just so evident. It was right on my face, yet I didn't take any heed. I was secure in my relationship. Throughout the evening, she made moves at him by complimenting him trivially, touching his arms and thighs unnecessarily, and forcing a conversation with him. She sat next to him at the dinner table. I gave her a look and she made a cute pout and said,
You get to sit with him every day. Today I can be his arm candy.
Everyone chuckled, and we took it as a light fun. During the conversation, she got to know that Smith goes for a walk after his dinner. As soon as he cleared up after the dinner, she offered to give him a tour of the neighborhood. Smith looked at me while I sat there with a straight face, not knowing what to say. Smith replied with an awkward yes, and they both went out for a walk. That night, while we were driving back from my parents' place, Smith asked me if I noticed how Carol was flirting with him. I laughed and brushed it off, saying she's an attention seeker. I thought Smith wasn't so shallow that he would fall for superficial beauty, but dang, he did. He was equally mesmerized by Carol's charm, and he cheated on the first opportunity he got. A few months later, I had my final year exams. As usual, I cut down on our hangouts to focus on my studies. Eventually, I found him cutting down the communication. When I confronted, he said he wanted me to focus on my finals. I was too busy to suspect any foul play. On the last day of my exam, I asked him to pick me up from college. He said he was busy. Later that night, I called him to check up on him. He said he was home, but was too tired and ready to doze off. I went to his place to surprise him, but it was locked. I called him again, but he didn't respond. I waited for his call the next day, but he didn't call back. Shamelessly, I called him again and asked him why did he lie the last night. He said he forgot to mention that he had crashed at his colleague's place. Stupid me didn't read this to be any signal. How would I? This was the first time anything such was happening to me. This continued for a week until my lost marbles came back to senses. I asked him on point blank if he wanted to break up with me. He hesitated for a few seconds before murmuring a yes. He said he no longer loved me. That was it. The last conversation we ever had. I didn't ask what, when, or how. Heartbreak is always painful, and that too without any reason, even more. He left me with a sense of insecurity, self-doubt, and many unanswered questions which he didn't answer, and neither did I ask. It took months and many bottles of single malt whiskey, but eventually I moved on. Glad that he broke up after my finals, else I would have taken one more year to finish up medical school. 7 months later, I got a call from Carol, and she invites me for her engagement. I congratulated her and asked about the guy. She didn't say the name and asked me to come to the party and meet him in person. I was happy for her. Yes, it saddened me for a while that I was supposed to be married during that time, but I was single and nursing my breakup. I tried to forget my miserable life and showed up at my sister's engagement. As soon as I entered the venue, I saw the board as Carol and Smith. It gave me shivers down my spine, but I calmed down myself, saying Smith is too common a name. He might be someone else. But as I went inside, I ran into 2 of Smith's friends. They turned to the other side when they saw me coming. My heartbeat raced as I went near the podium where Carol was supposed to be sitting with her fiancé. The moment I saw Smith sitting with her, his arms wrapped around hers, I froze. I didn't know what to do. I just stood there with tears in my eyes. The next I remember was my mom pulling me to a corner and asking me to behave. She asked me not to create any scene there and let everyone be happy. She said no one knows about our past and she would like to have it that way. I cried out loud and yelled, "You know everything and yet you let this happen. Carol is a witch. You all are evil. You all are in this together." By then, I saw Carol coming with an evil smile. It was like 15 years ago, yet I remember every word of her so clearly. That was the most humiliating moment of my life. She said,
"You thought you could have this man?
pointing toward Smith.
Handsome, tall, rich? Are you so plain? No way. You don't deserve him. You deserve someone plain like you. Do you see how beautiful we look together and how people are adoring us? Oh my God, so cute couple. Huh, everyone would have laughed to see you beside him."
I wanted to slap her right across her face, but my mom stopped me and asked me to leave. She thought I was there to stop the engagement. She was yelling at me, "Why did you come here? Don't you have any self-respect?" I said I didn't know that this witch is effing him. Had I known, I would have never shown my face. Carol denied to have invited me. She lied to Mom that she didn't invite me. Mom has asked her not to invite me because I would be hurt, but Carol deliberately invited to humiliate me. I left the place bawling and howling. My breakup pain bounced back. It would have been an understatement to say that it was difficult. It was the most traumatic phase of my life. The lowest point, I would say. Luckily, I graduated with a good grade and got into a good hospital with hectic duty hours. I barely got time to think about anything. I deliberately kept myself busy on off days. I moved on. Years later, I met my husband at work. He's the board member of the hospital chain I work. We dated for 4 years and got married, and now we are proud parents of 2 kids. Fast forward to a week ago when I got a call from an unknown number. I answered the call and the person identified herself as Carol. Even after hearing her name, it took me a few seconds to realize she was my sister. P.S. Few of my patients' names are also Carol. I asked her why she called me. She was acting all so sweet, asking about my life and all. The Carol I know, she won't spare a second on me without any motive. I said, "Cut the crap and say what do you want." She remained silent for a moment and said,
"Actually, I need help. My husband,
"Smith."
has gotten into trouble. A patient got post-surgery allergy and the hospital might sack him."
I was like, "What can I do about it?" She said that Smith worked at one of the hospital chains whose board member is my husband, so my husband could save him from any severe punishment. By then I had zoned out. I snapped at her not to call me ever again, and we ain't gonna help them. I didn't know that Smith was working for the same hospital chain as me. He was working at a different location. I looked up at the employee portal of the hospital and found Smith, but his current status showed suspended. I wanted to discuss this with my husband, but I didn't want to dig out my past, so I let this slide. 2 days back, my mom showed up at my door. Felt like I had seen a ghost. I cut them off since Carol's engagement day. She hugged me and cried, saying it was so good to see me after so many years. But I knew that her underlying motive behind all this sweetness was to save Smith's butt. My husband was home at the time. He heard out my mom's plea for helping her golden son-in-law. My husband said Smith is accused of medical negligence and there's an ongoing investigation against him. He said there's nothing he could do, and even if he could, he won't do it. He doesn't exercise his power for personal benefit. My mom bit her lips and left without saying a word. Yesterday, my husband came back from work and said that Smith's investigation had been concluded. He would be sacked from his job, but my husband has the power of letting him retain his medical license against a hefty penalty amount. He said he could ask the other board members to go lenient on Smith and not forward his case to state health care for further investigation. Now I'm at a fix. Should I forget my humiliation and help Smith, or should I make him pay the price of his deeds? I mean, in being a doctor, I know how difficult it is to get a medical degree, and losing the license is the worst thing that can happen for a doctor. Listen, you've been through enough, haven't you? You've already weathered the storm of Smith's betrayal and Carol's theatrics. Now she wants to drag you back into the madness to clean up her mess? I don't think so. You've got your own life to live, your own family to take care of, and your own sanity to preserve. So I let Carol's circus act steal the spotlight once again. Sometimes the best way to win a game is not to play at all. Let Smith and Carol figure it out on their own mess. You've moved on, built a life for yourself, and you don't owe them a single thing. So hold your head high, OP, and let them deal with the fallout of their own actions. Trust me, you'll thank yourself later. Update 1. There was no need to post it here and get the opinion of you guys. What Carol and my mother did after that day had made it clear that they don't deserve any help. They are anything but narcissistic. Carol and Mom have been hurling abuses at me on social media. I don't use Facebook much. This week when I opened it, I found I was tagged on several posts by Carol where she called me a vindictive witch for framing her husband. She has written a long post that I was jealous of her because Smith had dumped me and married her, and I was doing all this to avenge my betrayal. My mom had also jumped on the bandwagon and said that I had abused them and cut them off because I couldn't stand Smith getting married to Carol. Extended family has taken their side and commented that I had taken revenge too far by ripping off Smith's livelihood. Even Smith has commented that I was delusional and that he never loved me and he never proposed to me. He had always loved Carol. Like, what the F?
I immediately untagged myself and blocked them. I told my husband not to spare Smith from any of the charges. In fact, he should be punished to the maximum for each of his felonies. My husband gave me a smirking look and said he had never seen me this angry. So, Smith was officially sacked from the hospital, and his case has been forwarded to the state healthcare department for license cancellation. So, a fresh investigation would be conducted by the government body, and if he is found guilty of the charges that the hospital is claiming, he would lose his license and also go to prison. That's like a cherry on the cake. We'll update as the situation progresses. Right now, I'm enjoying the drama with a basket of popcorn. Yum yum. Edit. Small clarification. Carol and my mom were not added to my social media account. The thing is, I have an open account, so anybody could tag me in their post. I had not blocked them earlier because 15 years ago, I wasn't using social media. Now they are blocked from social media and also my life. It seems like Smith's fairy tale has taken a rather abrupt turn, hasn't it? Like I said, karma's got a funny way of catching up with people, doesn't it? And it looks like Smith's finally getting a taste of his own medicine. Update 2. How low can a person stoop? Now I know. So, Smith showed up at my workplace. Like I said, he worked at the same hospital chain as me, but different location. He posed himself as a patient and came inside my chamber. He knew that there was no way I would have met him if he had come to see me. I immediately asked him to leave. He said he has paid a fee to consult me, so as a doctor, I should treat him. Fair enough, I listened to his problems. Meanwhile, I swiftly switched on the voice recorder on my phone. I did this so that he couldn't trap me in another mess, and I'm glad I did. He was faking his health condition that he has gotten the flu and all. I acted professional and gave him the medication as per the symptoms, but he wasn't ready to leave and unnecessarily asked stupid questions. He started flirting. I asked him to stop and leave. He said, "I wanted to apologize to you long back. I didn't intend to hurt you, but your sister trapped me and made me sleep with her. Then she blackmailed me to marry her, else she would press molestation charges on me." I asked him to stop right there because all he spoke was complete BS. I could have called security on him, but I was really enjoying his desperation. Revenge is so sweet, I tell you. I heard him out with a satisfied smile. He went on to say, "I know you still love me. That's why you still hurt and want to take your revenge. Honestly, I still feel for you. I regret marrying Carol. If you can convince your husband to save me from prison time, I promise I'm going to leave Carol and be your lover. You don't need to leave your husband, but we can secretly have our own thing." That douchebag had the audacity to say this. I burst out in laughter and called security on him and asked him to leave. He had no idea that he was being recorded. The disappointment on his face was so satisfying. He thought he convinced me. I texted Carol and wanted to send her the recordings of her low-life husband. I said your loser husband visited my clinic posing as a patient. She said,
I know. He tells me everything. We also know that you still love him. I can let you sleep with him for a night if you can save his license in prison time.
Her response blew my mind. No point talking to her any further. They are together in this dirty game. I told my husband about this, and he was aghast. He said we could have sued him for the offering of bribes, but it would dig out my painful past. I said let him handle one charge at a time, but I'm going to do my bit to exact my revenge. I added Carol, Smith, my mom, and other relatives on Facebook. Carol and Smith accepted it at once. Maybe they took it to be a positive sign for me. Then I wrote a long post about how Carol, Smith, and my mom had been trying to manipulate me to help Smith skip prison time. I attached the screenshot of the conversation with Carol. I also turned the voice recordings into a still video with Smith and Carol's picture with the voice running in the background and uploaded it. That post just blew up with comments. I blocked Carol, Smith, and Mom because I knew they would retaliate. My extended family and relatives expressed their disgust about Carol offering to let Smith hook up with me to get away with his negligence. Carol and my mom tried to contact me, but I had blocked their calls and voicemails. I spent the whole of yesterday and today reading the comments on the post. People have gone next level trolling Carol and Smith. My weekend couldn't be better. Oh, the audacity of some people never fails to amaze, does it? I mean, seriously, how delusional can one get? So let me get this straight. Smith, the Casanova extraordinaire, decides to grace your workplace with his presence, spins some ludicrous tale about your undying love for him, and then he has the nerve to suggest a freaky rendezvous behind Carol's back? And as if that weren't enough, Carol chimes in with her own brand of insanity, offering to let you have a little piece of her hubby if it means saving his sorry behind from prison. I mean, is this real? With one well-timed post, you've exposed their shameless antics for the world to see, and the internet's response? Pure gold. After all, there's nothing quite like a weekend spent sipping tea and watching the drama unfold. Parents bought a house for sister from retirement money I saved for them. I cut them off financially.
The reason for writing this is because I, 33 male, feel financially exploited by my parents. My parents, Dad 68 and Mom 65, had worked hard all their lives and did their best to raise my sister, 29 female, and me. They provided us with everything they could. We weren't rich, but my parents made sure we never went without the essentials. They gave us a good education and a comfortable life. We had a decent life growing up, but as we became adults, the dynamics in our family started to shift, especially when it came to my sister, Ken. Ken had always been the golden child. Growing up, she was doted on, coddled, and pampered, while I was expected to be responsible and independent. My parents made excuses for her behavior, no matter how selfish or entitled she acted. They would say things like,
"She's just sensitive," or "She'll grow out of it."
but Ken never did. Instead, she became entitled to handouts. In her teens, she started demanding more. First, it was clothes, then it was a car, and later, it was money for expensive vacations. My parents always felt obliged, even when Ken got married at 21 to a guy who was just as entitled as her. My parents funded their lavish wedding. When I objected to this, they reasoned to me that Ken didn't attend college and saved them with the college tuition, so they should invest in her wedding. I asked why they didn't both work and fund their wedding, but how could they? The guy was 24 and of course financially unstable. It was no less than a child marriage. Despite the fact that my parents were dipping into their savings to put up a wedding for her, Ken never took it as a favor. She thought as a parent they were obliged to do this for her. On the other hand, I was expected to pay my own way through college and had to take out loans, which I'm still paying off. But I didn't complain. I figured that's just how things were. As the years passed, I became more financially successful. I worked hard, made good investments, and eventually landed in a well-paying job. My parents retired when Dad turned 63, and they relied partially on their pension money and partially on the financial support I lent them every month. They said they had some savings for the rainy day. I highly doubt they have any because Ken doesn't leave an opportunity to extort money from them. I never minded helping them out because I wanted to give back to the people who raised me. They needed help with bills, medical expenses, and general living costs, and I was happy to contribute. While I was helping them through daily expenses, I was always worried about their retirement life. Their savings weren't substantial, and with life expectancies increasing, I knew they might outlive their funds. Now I was single and didn't have many responsibilities, so a few grand to them doesn't hurt, but eventually I would have a family and I don't know how much responsibility would come my way. So I set up a savings account specifically for them. Every month, I'd put away a portion of my salary into that account to ensure that they'd be comfortable in their old age. I told them about it, and they were pleased with my thoughtfulness. They have access to that account. I also put the monthly allowance in that account. They use only a part of it and save the rest. They feel good to see their safety net growing. A few months ago, Ken called me with what she called urgent news. She was pregnant with her third child. I congratulated her, genuinely happy for her. But then the conversation took a turn. She and her husband had been looking at a new spacious house, a place in an upscale neighborhood. It was far beyond their means, but Ken insisted that they needed it because of the new baby on the way. Then came the bombshell.
"Mom and Dad think it would be a great idea if you could help us buy the house."
I was stunned. It wasn't just a mere request, but she had the audacity to order me. I was more shocked to know that my parents had planned this idea in her head, that I should buy her a house. As if I providing for them and saving a retirement fund for them wasn't enough. I politely told her that I couldn't afford to buy her a house. She pestered, but I reminded her that she and her husband were both working, so they should be able to manage on their own. Ken didn't take it well. Then I called up my parents in anger. They clarified that they didn't plant this idea, but Ken herself came to them, telling that she wants me to buy a house for her, and they didn't deter her from approaching me. They said,
"Well, we thought it was siblings matter, so we didn't interfere."
I repeated I'm not making an extravagant purchase whether she or they liked it or not. My parents said okay. I thought it was the end of the conversation. But it wasn't. A few days later, my parents asked me to come over for dinner, which wasn't unusual, so I didn't think much of it. When I arrived, though, I realized the dinner was just a pretext. As soon as I sat down, they started pressuring me to help Ken. Their argument was that Ken needed a bigger house, that the children deserved to grow up in a good neighborhood, and that, as her older brother, it was my duty to help her out. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My parents, who I had been supporting for years, were asking me to drain my savings to buy my sister a luxury she couldn't afford on her own. I flipped out that I simply couldn't do it. I had my own priorities to think about, and while I was willing to help Ken with smaller things, buying her a house was out of the question. My parents didn't take my refusal kindly. They tried to manipulate me, saying,
"Hun, your sister lives in a cramped, dingy apartment with 2 kids while the third is on the way. The neighbors are hippies and shady. They constantly feel unsafe, to raise their children in such an environment. You know all about all these, don't you? Do you not feel concerned about the safety of your nephew and niece? We expected you to gift her a house for years, but since you didn't pick it up on your own, we have to ask you."
They said this as if it were some kind of unspoken agreement that I have to take care of my sister's family. I naturally lost my temper and said she should have considered her financial situation before bringing those kids into the world, and even before that, when she was marrying so early, and that to a young guy with an unstable income. It's not my problem if she hasn't learned her lesson raising 2 kids in poverty, and now she's bringing a 3rd into this. The argument got heated, and I felt cornered, but I stood my ground. I told them that I had helped her enough and was okay lending her a few bucks, but not this. Eventually, I left the dinner midway because the conversation became baseless. They were not ready to understand my point of view. After that night, things were tense. My parents stopped calling me as often, and when they did, the conversations were cold. I know I haven't done anything wrong, but their reactions are making me feel like the bad guy. I know my sister is in bad shape financially, but does that mean I'm obligated to buy her a house? I don't think so. You've been covering for your parents' living expenses and medical bills, which is a commendable act of kindness. But apparently, your parental duties don't stop there. Now you're expected to buy your sister a new house because apparently the one she can afford is unsafe and inadequate. When they try to guilt trip you by pointing out the cramped living conditions and unsafe environment, it's clear they missed the memo that your savings are not their personal piggy bank. They're acting like the only thing you need to be concerned about is your sister's real estate portfolio rather than your own financial security. It's time they understand that while you're more than willing to help, which you should probably consider cutting off, your wallet isn't an all-you-can-eat buffet for every whim and fancy. Here's to hoping they finally realize that their golden child isn't your responsibility to provide for at the expense of your own financial well-being. Update 1. You won't believe what happened. A month ago, I noticed something strange. The retirement account I had been saving for my parents was suddenly emptied. All the money I had put aside for them was gone. I panicked, thinking the account might have been hacked or scammed. I called my parents immediately and asked if they had lost the debit card or if they shared the details with someone. Mom answered the phone, and when I told her about the theft, she was evasive. I could tell something was off. I asked her if she knew about it, and she denied it. However, when I pestered and said I was going to involve the cops, she said she had lent the money to my aunt, her sister, who needed it for a medical emergency. My aunt and I aren't particularly close, but I know she's had health issues in the past, so I believed her. Still, something didn't sit right with me as to why my mom lied to me in the first place. But then I let it slide. A week later, I was just thinking about the money I was about to put this month into that account. I realized I should check on Aunt. I haven't spoken to her for ages. To my surprise, rather shocked, she told me Mom had been out of touch with her for many months. When I mentioned the money, she was completely confused. She had no idea what I was talking about and assured me she hadn't asked my parents for anything. I instantly knew what had happened to my money. I immediately drove home and asked them directly, "You gave away the money to Ken, didn't you?" Mom tried to dodge the bullet, saying,
"No, we gave it to your aunt."
I snapped at her to stop the BS and told her I spoke to my aunt. Then Mom broke down and confessed they had given the money to Ken to buy the house she wanted. My worst fears came true, and I freaked out. Are you guys out of your minds? You gave away the retirement money to your stupid daughter, and how are you going to manage your expenses in old age? Did you think about that? She sobbed and said,
"We thought we have you."
I screamed, "Have me what? Am I some kind of wealthy god who prints money at my backyard? What if I marry a woman who doesn't want to work and I have to take care of her? What about the responsibilities I have after having children? How would I juggle so many things?" Mom was short of an answer, but Dad jumped in for her defense. "Well, we had to do this because you refused to help. You denied buying a house for Ken, remember? Son, you can abandon your sister, but we cannot turn away from our daughter. She needs a house more than we need that money." I was flabbergasted at his response. "Oh, really? She needs the house more than you need retirement money. So basically I'm a fool to have lived frugally for the last 10 years and saved this fund for you guys." It would be an understatement if I said I felt disheartened. I was furious. All the money I had saved for them, their safety net, was gone. Spent on a luxury my sister can't afford. Yes, that's right. A basic need, home, is no less than a luxury to Ken because she cannot afford an apartment in a good neighborhood. I told them that what they had done was incredibly irresponsible and they had betrayed my trust. They tried to defend themselves, saying they had done it for the family. They had no choice, and that I had forced their hand by refusing to help. The gaslighting was intense. They twisted the situation, making it seem like I was the one who had abandoned them, like I was the villain for not bending to their will. I couldn't believe it. I had been the one supporting them for years, and yet they were making me out to be the bad guy. I was at my wit's end. I slumped on the couch, not knowing what to do. Mom came to calm me down. She tried her emotional gigs to make me feel better. She told me that the registration of the new house was in a week, and now they cannot withdraw the funds from Ken. I was like, hold on, the house is yet to be purchased, right? Poor me thought I could somehow save my hard-earned money. I tried to convince them of the importance of retirement money, giving various examples of relatives and neighbors who died in poverty due to money shortages. They were partially convinced, but they were apprehensive, or probably scared to ask Ken to return the money. I said, I'll do it. Call her home. So Mom called her, asking her to come down as something urgent needed to be discussed. She came over, and I tried to knock some sense into her head that buying a house out of a parent's safety fund wasn't a good idea. Instead, they should save up and buy something in their budget. But she's an entitled woman. How could she let go of the money she had already conquered? She put her foot down and said she was not going to return it. She in fact said she had already made the payment, so she can't return it. Our discussion blew into an ugly fight. I also remained on my grounds and told my parents unless they withdrew the money and put it back into the retirement account, I would cut them off financially. No more help with bills, no more money for groceries, nothing. I didn't want to do it, but I felt like I had no other choice. They needed to understand the consequences of their actions. Ken came to the rescue, assuring them not to worry and that she would take care of them if I cut them off. She said it in such a casual, flippant way as if it was no big deal. My parents latched onto her words like a lifeline. I knew better. Ken had never been responsible for anything in her life. She was used to taking, not giving. I warned my parents that they were making a huge mistake, but they wouldn't listen. They were convinced that Ken would come through for them, and nothing I said could change their minds. I cannot fathom how foolish people could be. Ken and her husband are barely able to make ends meet. How would they take care of our parents? Yes, moving to their own house from the apartment would save them the rent, but is that money enough to take care of parents? Plus, they would have a mortgage to pay. The money my parents gave to her would cover barely 40% of the price. But she is a delusional being. Not only she, but her husband too, has zero finance planning. The confrontation made me dizzy, and I ultimately stormed out with my last words that from now on, they shouldn't count on me for any financial needs whatsoever. It's been a couple of weeks since then. I was hoping for some sort of miracle to happen, and they withdraw the money, but it doesn't happen this way. Ken is now the proud owner of a fancy house in an upper state neighborhood, and she cannot stop flaunting it on social media. Convincing Ken to return the money? That's like asking a cat to give up its sunny spot on the windowsill. Your ultimatum of cutting them off financially is exactly what needs to be done in this circus. After all, if you're the only responsible adult in the room, you might as well refuse to finance their ongoing drama, especially if it's just going to fund Ken's extravagant lifestyle. Update 2. It happened as I predicted. Ken faltered in her promise, and my parents came back to me crawling. As I pledged, I cut them off. Not only financially, but also in general. For weeks I felt bad and conflicted, but I knew I had to stand my ground. I couldn't keep enabling their poor decisions, especially when they had chosen my sister's whims over their own financial security. Ken was over the moon after she bought the house, of course. For the initial few months, she covered some of the monthly expenses of our parents. I knew it wouldn't last, but I hoped, for their sake, that I was wrong. However, it didn't take long for things to start falling apart. Ken and her husband quickly realized that the math was not adding up. How could it be? She doesn't have a stable job. Her husband's job is stable but not high-paying, and the costs of the mortgage, utilities, children's education, and upbringing began to pile up. Within 6 months, she was struggling to make ends meet. The logic of using the rent money to cover the other expenses suddenly didn't add up. They soon maxed out on their credit cards. They asked my parents to fend for themselves because they barely could have a proper meal now. My parents had saved a little from the money I used to lend. They used it, but when it got dried up, they started calling me again. First with subtle hints about how hard things were, then with more direct requests for money. I felt terrible for them, but I also felt vindicated. This was exactly what I warned them about. After talking to them a few times, I ignored their calls and texts. I don't feel good about it, but still, I'm holding on to my grounds for my own sanity. I know I'm being fair and just, but it's still hurting to see them suffer. They did it to themselves, OP. You did nothing wrong. You were enabling them for a long time. Update 3. A lot of drama happened. Phew, where do I begin? A week ago, I received a call from my mom. I initially ignored, but she persistently called. I sensed it was urgent. I responded. She sounded desperate, her voice trembling. She told me Ken had sold the house and moved out of the city. I was like, so what? After I pulled the plug on the financial support, they went to Ken and gave her a choice. Either pay the monthly allowance as I used to pay, or give them back the money they had lent for buying the house. Ken, the entitled being, quarreled with my parents, and this time they didn't back off. Ultimately, she agreed to pay them a monthly allowance. After a month, Mom contacted her for the money, and she stalled it for a couple of weeks, and then suddenly she disappeared. Her number switched off, and she has blocked all of us from social media. When my parents went to her place, the house was locked and some painting work was gone. They inquired and found out that the house belonged to someone else now. Evidently, she has sold and ran off to avoid paying back the money. What a fraudster. My mom cried, saying they were sorry, that they had made a wrong choice, that they didn't know what else to do. It was heartbreaking to hear that they are in trouble. They wanted me to fund them financially as I was doing it earlier. I wanted to help them, but I was reluctant to do so because now I felt exploited. So I said I needed some time to think because I had some other priorities coming up. I have been seeing a girl for 2 years now, and I think I'm ready to take the relationship to the next step. We want to move in together, move to a spacious house, and maybe get married next year. And all of these involve money, don't they? A week later, I went to meet them. They repeated the same stuff about how Ken vanished and blah blah. I reminded them that I had warned them about this and that I had tried to protect them from this very situation. My dad tried to argue, saying it was my responsibility, but I told him that responsibility goes both ways. They had chosen to put their trust in Ken instead of me, and now they had to face the outcome of that choice. It amazed me to see how they felt entitled to my money, as if it was some sort of unwritten rule that I have to bear their expenses despite what they have done to me. They tried to emotionally manipulate me that they had raised me, and now it was my responsibility to give it back to them. I said I agree, and I did try to pay it back, but you guys screwed up big time, and now I'm done being a patsy. They refused to accept that I was right, and they shouldn't have betrayed my trust and gone behind my back to help her. Instead, they gaslighted that this situation would have never occurred if I bought her a house. I understood there was no point arguing with them, and it was better to stay away from them for my own sanity. I said, "You shouldn't bite the hand which feeds you. You made a choice, and now you have to live with the consequences," and stormed out of the house. It's been a few days since that conversation, and I haven't heard from my parents since. I know they're struggling financially. It hurts, more than I can put into words. I never wanted it to come to this, but I had to take a stand. I had to show them that their actions had consequences. They spent their whole lives enabling Ken, and I don't think they'll ever change. As for Ken, I have no idea where she is now. We haven't spoken since she abandoned our parents, and honestly, I don't care to. I get that it's hard to watch them struggle, but hey, they're the ones who rolled the dice and bet the farm on Ken's fleeting sense of responsibility. It's almost like watching someone build a sandcastle at high tide. Amazing while it lasts, but it's just a matter of time before it's swept away. In the end, he took a stand and set boundaries. It's tough love, but sometimes it's the only kind that works. You're not a financial ATM or a human safety net for their poor decisions. As for Ken, she's probably off on some tropical island, sipping cocktails and laughing at how easily she pulled off the biggest con of her life.
Stepdad wants me to pay rent as I'm an adult. He doesn't know I own the house, so I kicked him out. I recently turned 18, and it led to a major confrontation between me and my stepdad. The day after my 18th birthday, he handed me a piece of paper with a list of things I should be paying for. The topmost in the list, and the most significant part, was the house rent, followed by food and electricity. I was in shock. His action implied that he had been waiting for me to hit adulthood so that he could dump all that responsibility on my shoulders. My dad passed away when I was really young, like 8 or something. It was super tough for me to lose my big dude at that age. My mom was there to support me. Growing up, it was just my mom and me. It was like the two of us against the world. We didn't have much, but we had each other. Mom worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat, and I did my part by being a responsible kid. I rocked in school and also took up the responsibility of household chores as much as I could. I could make a simple dinner by the age of 10 and slay the dishes. We had a tiny 2-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood. Life was peaceful. Things started to shake when I was 14. My mom met this dim-wit man, David. He seemed caring and loving at first. Very soon, he became regular at our place, and within a year, they were married. Initially, I was happy for my mom. It was after a very long time that I had seen her happy. She deserved someone to take care of her, and David seemed like the perfect man. At least, he posed himself to be at the time. He butted into our house, and for a while, things seemed okay. Soon enough, he started shedding off his mask and showed his nasty attitude. He was controlling, demanding, and had a short temper. He made it clear that He was the head of the house and expected everyone to follow his rules. My mom, who had always been strong and independent, seemed to wilt under his authority. I watched helplessly her becoming more and more submissive, afraid to stand up to him. Watching her change her personality made me wonder the foundation of the relationship. I don't know why she fell for him in the first place. Loneliness and desperation can actually fog your brain, and I could see that happening to my mom. I protested when she stood with him, even though it was clear he was toxic. David and I never got along. He saw me as a threat, someone who challenged his authority and disrupted his control over my mom. He would insist I call him Dad. I laughed at his face and called him David. Yeah, I'm a rebel. He felt that to be insulting because that wouldn't feed his ego. I said he can do whatever he wants, but I'm not going to call him Dad. We got into arguments and he called me ungrateful and disrespectful. He complained about how much it cost to feed and clothe me, even though it was my mom who was working 2 jobs to make ends meet. It took until I could, but once I started giving him back, I spitted venom on him. If he called me ungrateful, I would call him a bum. However, my mom would always mediate and insist I apologize because whatever be it, he was my stepdad. I never apologized, and that created a dent in my relationship with my mom. A few months back, I completed high school, and now I'm applying for an undergrad at a local college. My intention for scouting a local college is to save on the rent. I spend half of my day at college and the remaining time at work. I've taken up a part-time job and thought of living at home and saving that money to pay for my college expenses. But this jerk got different plans for me. Now I really don't know what to do. I can't afford the money he has been demanding. He said he was giving me a discount as I'm not earning full-time, but the amount is still ridiculously high for a college student. I'm an adult now and I cannot fight with him to let me live for free. Really don't know what to do. Do you guys know any better way of slaying this situation? Sounds like David is trying to give you a crash course in adulthood, complete with unexpected fees and a syllabus on how to dodge them. Maybe you should start a counter-proposal. Charge him for all those years of unpaid dishwashing and teenage angst. It's time he learned the cost of being a stepdad. Update 1. Things got worse. Not for me, but for David. As some of you suggested, it was better to live outside if I anyway had to pay my rent. So I started hunting out for cheat dungeons. I posted on Facebook about it. My uncle, father's brother, saw the post. He asked me why wasn't I living in my own house. We were not in touch with any of the relatives after Dad's death. I left him on scene. Then he congratulated me on the house. His message goes, "Oh, I realize you're 18 now. Congratulations on the house. Must be feeling grateful to your dad, huh?" I got confused. What the hell was that? Until then it never occurred to me as to who owned the house. I thought it was of Dad's, and after that it got transferred to Mom's. Or maybe it was still in Dad's name. I never cared to ask Mom about it. Curiosity got the better of me, and I asked my uncle what did he mean. He replied, "Your father left that house to you, didn't he?" I said, "I don't know. He disappeared after that." 2 days later he replied, "Sorry, maybe some misunderstanding. Check with your mom." And that's it. I chased him for more context, but he ghosted me. He dropped the bombshell and vanished. Several thoughts crossed my mind. I thought maybe my father willed the house to me, and my mother had whisked it away when I was a kid. I got suspicious of David if he had forged the document or taken our house. I didn't want to go to Mom with half-baked info. I spoke to my friend about this, and he suggested I reach out to my dad's lawyer, but how do I find him? So I decided to give the benefit of the doubt to my mom and confront her regarding David's demand for the rent. I hadn't discussed this with Mom until then. I thought she was game with his ask. I didn't want to have this conversation in front of a half-minded junkie, so I scooped out some time off from work and went to my mom's workplace. I asked her if she knew David had demanded I pay for rent, food, and electricity. She was shocked. She said she had no clue. She assured me I didn't have to pay anything and I could live in the house until I wanted. I asked her hesitantly, "Mom, who's the owner of the house?" She was taken aback. Her reaction terrified me because my question was very simple. She fumbled for an answer. I asked, "Was it Dad's house or yours?" She quickly replied, "It was your dad's house, and honey, I have to rush. I have a lot of pending work for today. We'll talk later, and don't worry about paying the rent." She went back inside her office. From her reaction, one could definitely make out it was murky behind the curtain. When I came home that day, David was staring at me with red eyes. I ignored him for a while, but he seemed deliberate to mess up with me. I gathered my spine and asked him what's the matter. He screamed that I told him to my mother. I said I didn't whine. I had just told her what was happening in the house. He said he is the man of the house and he makes decisions about the house, and I have to pay the rent. I didn't back down. I shot back in the same tone. "Is this your house? No, right? Then who gave you the right to ask me for the rent? Do you pay my food and electricity bills? No, is it? Then why are you opening your crappy mouth? He was like, my wife pays for it. I screamed, yes, your wife is my mother, and if she doesn't have a problem feeding me, why do you put your grumpy nose in our business? My mom was in the shower, maybe. She came running outside and heard me screaming. I told her that David was asking me for the rent. She looked at David and said in a firm voice, he is my son, and he would not pay anything to live here. For the first time in so many years, I heard her talking to him in real tone. He backed off and went into the bedroom. He had no right to demand rent from me, especially since he wasn't even contributing financially to the household. My mom's income covered most of our expenses, and David's occasional odd jobs barely made a dent. After David was gone, my mom tried to calm me down. I asked her who owned the house, and she said, this is your father's house, and no one's going to ask you to leave or pay rent. I still insisted on knowing who owned the house, whether it was still in Dad's name or had she transferred it into hers. She said, how does that matter? I said, it matters to me. If it was in her name, then her loser husband can show his claim, but if it's in my dad's name, I'm going to kick that rookie out of this place. Tears rolled down my mom's cheeks, and she calmed me down, saying I shouldn't harbor hatred against my stepdad. Her tears made me suspicious, and I blurted out, are you hiding something? Is this house mine? She broke down, and my suspicions got clear. You see, my dad was bedridden for a year before dying, so if you do 2 + 2 with my uncle's message and this situation, it was kind of a no-brainer to conclude that my dad would have given the house to me. She took me to my room, locked the door, and said, yes, this house is yours. Your dad gave this to you and made me the custodian until you turned 18. I asked, then why are you whispering? Why did you sweep this under the rug? She lowered her head and said she was afraid of how David would react if he found out that I, a teenager, owned the house he lived in. I said, I'm not a teenager anymore. It's been 3 months since I turned 18. When were you planning to reveal this secret? She said she was figuring out the best way to go forward. And what was that? She said if she had made it clear to David that he wouldn't ask me to pay anything to live in the house. I screamed, that's it? What about him living in my house for free? She said, but honey, he's your stepfather. I shouted, he is nothing to me but your husband, whom I have tolerated enough, but not anymore. I stormed out of the house. I saw David coming out of his room upon hearing my screams. I don't know what happened after that. I have been living with my friend since 2 days. Today, my mom came to my workplace and requested me to return home. I was not in a situation for confrontation, so I said, okay, and asked her to leave. I have texted her that I want my dad's will and the other documents. She asked me to come home and discuss the matter. The thing is, I know what will happen when I go home. She would use her tears to manipulate me and let David live in the house. Though I know the house is mine, I have no documents to prove it. What should I do now? Is there any chance she or David can whisk away the property under my nose? Whoa, that's quite the revelation, OP. If your mom and David try to mess with the house you rightfully inherited, it might be time to get proactive. Consider calmly insisting on seeing the documents to prove ownership. It's essential to stay level-headed and gather all the facts before making any decisions. Update 2. Hello all. Thanks for erupting on my comment box. Let me pick up from where I left off. So I came back home after a week. As usual, David's lazy bum was lying on the couch. He asked me where I was for the week. I ignored his existence and walked past him. He got agitated and repeated the same sentence. I stopped and stared at him. He said, ooh, I got scared. What are you going to do this time? Complain to your mommy? Go, run and complain. You think complaining to her would save your fat butt from paying this rent? I'm going to get that from you. I knew that dummy was clueless that I owned the house. I smiled at him and said, I owned the house and I wouldn't be paying a cent. Instead of finding ways to make me bend, watch out for yourself when I throw you out of this house. His face turned red with anger and disbelief. Then he burst out in laughter and said, You got me. Good bluffing, you dog. He demanded to see the proof. I asked, does he have evidence that the house was in my mother's name? He said no. I said, then let's seek the papers and check the real owner. That evening, when my mom arrived, I heard there was a huge fight between them. The next day, when I went home, my mom shoved my dad's will and the property documents on my face. She blamed me for their fight. I ignored her drama and went to my room. The documents had the details of my dad's lawyer. I immediately contacted him and asked him about the process for transferring the property officially to my name. I went outside to find David lounging on the couch. I called his name loudly. That pisses him off. I said, now that you know I own the house, I want you to pay rent. Not only for this month and going forward, but also for the last 3 months since I turned 18. David's reaction was explosive. He called my mother from the other room and said I was asking for rent. That timid woman said sure, she would pay it for next month. I yelled at her that I don't want money from her, but from him. He lost his temper, and I lost mine. We got into a huge fight and name-calling. To mediate the situation, my mom told David to pay the rent while she would cover the other expenses of the house. He accused me of scheming against him and manipulating my mom. This dude had the audacity to demand that I turn the house over to him, claiming that as the man of the house, he should be the rightful owner. I laughed in his face and said he should be thankful I was not kicking him out of the house. He started yelling at my mom, blaming her for keeping the secret and siding with me. I had enough. I cannot see my mom getting exploited by this nutcase. Though she was not standing up for herself, I wanted to do my bit. I told David he had 24 hours to pack his things and leave. He tried to argue, but I threatened to call the cops on him if he ever raised his voice on me again. He stormed out of the house. My mom comes to me crying. She requested me to let David live with us, and she would pay me for the rent. I yelled at her for feeding David's ego and encouraging his narcissism. She sobbed and said people have to adjust in love. She was afraid that David might leave her if she didn't listen to him. She said, "It's difficult to find love at this age. After your father's death, it took me so many years to start dating again, and if this one also fails, I would end up living alone in my old age." I said better to live alone happily than with someone like David. I admired her when she was fierce, who was ready to take the world alone, but now she is reduced to being David's doormat, and I have no sympathy for her tears. The next day, David was gone. My mom was devastated. She loved him despite his flaws and couldn't believe that I kicked him out. She accused me of tearing the family apart and said that I had no right to ruin her life. She resents me for what I had done, and I'm struggling to understand why she couldn't see that I was trying to protect us. I just couldn't see her paying for that toxic man while he sloths on the couch the whole day. She says I'm too young to understand the complexities of a grown-up relationship. Is it really so? I don't know. If a mature relationship wants me to be a floor mat, then I don't want to have one. Well, it sounds like you've graduated from dealing with high school drama to managing adult-sized melodramas at home. Who knew owning a house at 18 would come with a side of eviction threats and a family feud? If David wants to play house, he'll have to find a new couch to surf on. And as for your mom's love life, maybe she should consider swiping left on the couch potatoes next time. Remember, in this house, you decide who gets the remote control. Update 3. Hey guys, I got another update. So after David left, Mom and I had countless arguments. Sometimes I felt guilty for causing her so much pain. Earlier, I wondered why she needed a husband when she was providing for herself, but later on, seeing her loneliness, I felt David left a void in her life. However, I was convinced that he was no good to Mom. I know I shouldn't be making decisions for her, but in this situation, I felt she was better off without him. She is 47. She still has a lot of time to explore love than to settle down with a junkie. I tried to keep her happy, but she withdrew herself from me. I focused on my studies and tried to give her the space she needed. I hoped that, in time, she would come to see that kicking David out was the best thing for us. I also contributed more to the household expenses, even though I didn't need to pay rent. I wanted to offload her burden. Eventually, Mom and I started getting along, and she joked about how she lost her assertive tone living with David. He made her think she was too bold and dominating to be loved and turned her into a submissive slave. Just when things were starting to stabilize, David reappeared. He showed up at our doorstep one evening, looking disheveled and desperate. He claimed he had nowhere else to go and begged my mom to let him stay. She was torn. Despite everything, she still had feelings for him and didn't want to see him homeless. I was furious. After everything he had put us through, he had the nerve to come back and ask for help. My mom was caught in the middle, and I knew it was a difficult decision for her. She was not yet over him completely. She requested me to let David stay with us for a few days. Apparently, she needed some closure with him. I really don't get the complexities of these relationships. I freaked out and said I cannot share the roof with him. Even if he stays for a day, I would move out. After a huge fighting match, my mom let David stay for a few days while figuring things out. I packed my bags and moved into a friend's apartment temporarily. I was hurt and disappointed. After all he did to her, she still chose him. Love is toxic, I tell you. 2 days later, Mom called and told me that David wanted to apologize to me and make amends. She swore he was a changed man now. I asked her what would I do with his apology. She said she didn't raise me to be mean and arrogant and that I should forgive him, and we start living like a family as before. I said David was never a family to me, and there's no way I would share the roof with him. Living with him like a family, my butt. I'll kick him in his butt if he stays for one extra day in my house. After a long silence, my mom said, if he goes, she goes out too. I was almost in tears hearing this. After all, she chose him over me. I said I'm fine to let her go if she feels she's better off with David. It's been a week since I've been living alone. I do have a spell of guilt feeling, but I am standing firm in my decision. Letting go of my mom was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made. but it was also the right one. I don't know if my mom would ever realize that she chose the wrong side and is wasting her life with David. Sometimes I feel it wouldn't have cost me anything to let them live in the house, but then I cannot imagine living with deadbeat David. Is it normal to feel this way, or am I going nuts? Choosing between peace of mind and letting toxic people back into your life isn't easy. Maybe in a parallel universe, David would have turned into a model housemate who pays rent on time and never leaves dirty dishes in the sink. But in this universe, it's okay to draw a line in the sand and prioritize your own sanity. You absolutely did the right thing here, OP. It's your mother's loss. Mom moved me out of the house at 8. To accommodate her new family, I took possession of the house. I am 24. Let me start off by saying I was kicked out by my mom because she needed to impress her new husband. Okay, if kicked out seemed a little harsh, we can say she moved me out of my own home and made me live with my grandparents, father's side. I have all the good memories until my dad was alive. Unfortunately, we lost him when I was 7. As a kid, I felt devastated. I was very close to my dad, and sending him off inside a coffin broke my heart. I still remember that moment very clearly, and it saddens me till date. While I was still processing the loss, my mom showed up with another man and insisted I call him Dad. I was like, no way. I don't know if I was right or wrong, but I just didn't feel right to call him Dad just within a few months of my own father's demise. After that first meeting, I often found him in my mom's bedroom, and it was difficult to see how quickly my mom had moved on. She didn't even wait a year before bringing my dad's replacement to the house. I was not ready to accept him as my dad's replacement. I had recently turned 8 when they planned their beautiful wedding. They had put up a pretty huge wedding for second-timers. Anyways, none of my business. She left me with my grandparents as she went on her honeymoon. A month passed, but she didn't turn up. I kept asking my grandparents when would Mom come to pick me up, but they didn't have any answer. Then suddenly she showed up one day. I was so excited to see her after so long. I rushed to hug her, but she had brought all my belongings to dump me at my grandparents'. I was heartbroken, to say the least. I lived with my grandparents until my high school. I was happy with them. My mom used to show up sometimes only to tell me how much she loved me and cared for me. Sometimes I used to question her that if she loved me so much, why had she dumped me at my grandparents'? She had no answer. She would try to cover it up by saying, "Oh, your grandparents are turning old. They need a helping hand to run their groceries and dump out their trash." It was much later that she admitted the actual reason. She had given my room to her stepchildren. Bill, Mom's husband, had 2 children who moved into our house with Bill after their wedding. My mom prioritized her new family over me. It was natural for me to get resentful over her, so eventually I stopped bothering her. After high school, I moved out from my grandparents, but I still visited them often. They were kind of saviors for me. They raised me. If not for them, my childhood would have been ruined. I'm now 24. After working for a year in marketing, I thought of starting my own venture. I needed capital for that, so I thought of leasing my house. Oh, if I didn't mention this before, there's a bummer on the way for my mom and her loving family. Actually, the house in which they are living belongs to me. Yeah, that's right. My dad made a will on his deathbed, and he very meticulously gave me every penny he had, including the house. I was a kid when his lawyer read his will after his funeral, but with the look on my mother's face, I can surely say that she was not liking it at all. Later, I got to know that she tried several times to overturn the will, but she lost it every time. My dad had made the will very precise that the house would be mine, but I can sell or lease it only after I turn 21. Until then, no one touches the property. My grandparents think that Dad would have probably foreseen Mom's plan, and that's why he made a rigid will. Else, she might have manipulated me in my childhood to give away the house to her. Last month, I called Mom to inform her about my plan of leasing out the house, but she didn't answer my calls. This week when I went to meet my grandparents, I told them I was planning to make some extra bucks from the house. They gave a weird reaction. I asked them what's the matter. They said I might have to face a lot of resistance to vacate the house from Mom because her stepdaughter is pregnant with a teenage boy who has run away from his responsibilities. Also, Bill has lost his full-time job and is working at a store in the evening, so basically they are in a bad shape financially. Now, I really don't know what to do. I also need that house now. I have quit my job and I need capital to start my business. I must say, OP, your mom has quite the knack for dodging responsibility. Moving you out of your own house just to make room for her new hubby's clan? Talk about cold-hearted real estate management. And let's not forget about dear old Dad pulling a plot twist from beyond the grave with that ironclad will. It's like he knew his ex-wife's game plan better than she did herself. Now that's what I call poetic justice. But hey, don't get too comfortable in that landlord's chair just yet. Looks like Mom and her merry band of misfits aren't going down without a fight, and they've got a pregnant stepdaughter and a jobless husband in their corner. Talk about adding insult to injury. But did she cut you a break when she dropped you off at your grandparents'? Nope. Update 1. It became quite dramatic, picking up from where I left. Like I said, my grandparents informed me that Mom and her family are going through a rough patch, so they might not vacate my house. I thought I'll inform Mom about my plan and give them a few months' time to put their life together. Before I was thinking of giving a month's notice, but knowing their situation, I thought of giving 3 to 4 months. Since Mom was not answering a call, I went to meet her at home. The house was nothing as before, and neither was my mom. Both had a cold vibe. Maybe she had sensed the motive behind my visit. On seeing me at the door, she gave out a fake smile and a half-hearted hug. Mind you, we were meeting after almost a decade. Yeah, she stopped visiting me after I entered my teenage years. Yeah, I had turned bitter towards her. Why would I not? Even though we met after so many years, she didn't bother to ask me how I'd been. She was not interested in knowing anything about me. It was like, "Oh, you're here. Must have been something important that brought you to my doors." The pleaser in me said, "Oh no, nothing important. Just came to check on you. It's been a long time." She smiled and said, "Sure it is." A wave of silence followed for another 5 minutes until I stood up to leave. It was definitely unpleasant. I didn't feel welcomed at all. Besides Mom, my pregnant stepsister was also home, and she too gave me a very bad look, as if I were there to create some sort of trouble. For the moment, I dropped the idea of taking back the house. I explored other means of arranging the money for my business, but Mom crossed all limits of narcissism. Last week was my dad's 15th death anniversary. My grandparents held a small prayer ceremony at the church. Since I was in the town, I decided to have a decent ceremony by feeding the poor and giving off some gifts to the underprivileged children. I invited my friends and relatives for the prayer. I emailed the invite to my mom as well, but she didn't respond. When I traced the history of the mail, I found she hadn't opened it. This was my first mail to her. I thought it went to spam or something, so I showed up at her house again. This time, Mom wasn't at home. My stepsister, Brenda, answered the door. No hello, no greetings. A straight question slapped on my face.
"You're back again? What's the matter?"
I said I was here to meet Mom. She said,
"With the way she spoke to you last time, do you think she wants to meet you again?"
She said it so bluntly that I couldn't get what she said, and I spit it out that I was here to invite Mom for the prayer ceremony of my dad. She chuckled in my face and said,
"That was like centuries ago. You're still holding that up? Get over it."
I said, "Excuse me, he was my dad, and it's none of your business to comment." She rolled her eyes and pushed off to her room. I sat there like an idiot for a few more minutes, and then I left a note for Mom on the table. I asked her to call me back. She called me the next day, and I told her about the prayer ceremony. She remained quiet for a minute, and then said she would not be able to make it because she had to take Brenda for a checkup. That was a bummer. I mean, she could have said she would try, but turning it down outrightly was disappointing. I replied sarcastically, "Yeah, of course they are your priority. We are no one to you, so be it. Good luck raising that narcissistic woman and her bastard child." She flipped out that I used that word. I said, why would I be nice to her when she was so mean to me? She made fun of my emotions. To defend her, Mom said, "It was natural for her to get furious. You can't talk about dead in front of a pregnant woman. You're such an insensitive dud like your father." The moment she said that, I lost my mind. I yelled at her that she should not talk trash about my father. If anyone who's insensitive here, it has to be her. The way she was talking about my dead father. She said, "Your father died 15 years ago. God damn, get over it." I said, "Sure, the way you did, within weeks or maybe days. Who knows? You know what? You don't need to come. My father would not like your prayer after seeing your true colors." I hung up the phone after saying this. The same day, I hired a lawyer and started the process of sending a legal notice of eviction. The lawyer took some 15 days to validate my dad's will and send the notice to Mom. As expected, when the eviction notice reached them, she freaked out. Apparently, she never thought I would go to such lengths to exact my revenge on her for not attending Dad's prayer ceremony. I laughed at her voicemail and blocked her. When she couldn't contact me anywhere, she showed up at my grandparents' place. I wasn't there at the time. Oh yeah, I'm living with my grandparents again until I put my life together. My mother requests my grandparents to convince me to withdraw the eviction notice. My grandparents are calm and nice people. That's why they didn't throw her out. They said they don't have any say in this. It's my property and I get to do anything I want. Fair enough. The answer didn't go well to her, and she blamed my grandparents for raising me as an entitled brat. Really? What was she smoking when she said that? I asked my grandma why she did not say anything to my narcissistic mom. My grandparents were like, "We don't want to mess up with such a woman." I said, "I want to mess up, and now I'm not going to let them live in my house for one extra day." I gave the eviction notice as per the tenants' law in the country, though they are not tenants. They ain't paying any rent to me. On top of that, I'm the one paying the property taxes every year, so legally, I'm entitled to throw them out right away. My grandparents are God-fearing people. They talked me out of this idea. They said for the sake of the Lord, give them that 1 month to find another shelter. There's a pregnant woman there and we shouldn't pull her into the streets. I sighed that she didn't need any help either. She was equally toxic. My grandparents were like, so be it. She might be a sinner, but her unborn is not. Don't be cruel to that little creature. They convinced me to wait, else I was adamant to evict them on that very day. The next day I got a call from Mom. I ignored it. She did the same to me when I was calling her. She messaged me, to talk. It's urgent. I responded to check out my calendar and meet me at grandparents' at my open slot. This didn't go well with her. She sent a long reply that I was trying to throw weight on her. What did I do with her 5 paragraphs mail? Nothing. That's right, I didn't respond. She might have got the hint that I was not going to give in to her pressure. Throughout my childhood, whenever I used to cry or throw tantrums for going home, instead of loving me, she would scold me and ask me to behave. She would petrify me to be a good lad and not throw tantrums. This was her parenting style and it worked. In order to keep her happy and not mess up with her, I would stop sobbing. But after she left, I would sulk at the corner of the house for hours. Not anymore. It's time for her to sulk, but sadly, she won't have a corner to herself. So she came to meet me and I deliberately made her wait for an hour. She got anxious. I asked my grandparents to stay out of it. She kept asking them about me. They said they don't know and swiftly pushed back to their room. When I arrived to meet her, she gave me a look of, well, where were you? I've been waiting here for an hour. But she didn't say anything. She sat there with a straight face. People in her situation would have tried to please me, but remained solid on her grounds. She said, okay, let me start. I can't sit here forever. I have jobs to do. I murmured under my breath, oh, sure you do. Finding a house is a difficult job. She gave me an annoyed look and said, what is this notice about? I replied, it is written in English. I'm sure you can read that, or do you want me to do that for you? She was absolutely pissed off. She threw the notice at my face and said she was not going to vacate the house on the basis of some stupid notice. After she was done yelling, I said, then let's wait and witness the repercussions of not following the court order. She was like, I gave birth to you. Don't you try to outsmart me. That house is of my husband, and no one can throw me out from there. I said, surely a legal heir can. I was responding to her calmly in order to piss her off, and she did get pissed off. But the moment she referred to my dad as her husband, I lost my mind. Really? You have the audacity to call him your husband when you skipped his prayer saying he was history. You don't deserve his house. You're just squatters, and I'm going to free that house from all the leeches. She stood up and she said she was done being nice to me, and now I'll have to deal with her lawyer. I laughed and said, sure, by all means. We still have 20 days to go. Let's see what she pulls up from her sleeves. Hey, it's not all doom and gloom. You got your trusty eviction notice ready to roll, like a legal ninja serving up justice on a silver platter. And the best part? Watching Mom squirm like a cat on a hot tin roof when she realizes she's been served a heaping helping of reality. Let's take a stroll down memory lane, shall we? From the moment she replaced your dad with a new husband before the ink was even dry on his eulogy, it was clear that her priorities were as twisted as a pretzel in a tornado. She then had the audacity to kick you to the curb and give your room away like last season's fashion, all in the name of impressing her new hubby. Talk about a textbook example of misplaced loyalty. And let's not forget her stellar parenting techniques. Instead of offering comfort and support when you needed it the most, she opted for tough love and cold indifference, leaving you to pick up the pieces of your shattered childhood while she gallivanted off into the sunset. But now the tables have turned, and it's time for Mom to reap what she's sown. Update 2. I got the house after a lot of tussle. Like I mentioned in my earlier post, I gave 30 days notice to Mom and her family to evict the house. She came to me and tried to gaslight the entire thing. I shut her down, and she leaves. The next series of events was nothing but pure narcissism by them. Could you believe that her stepdaughter, Brenda, came charging at me, and on top of that, threatened to press a harassment case on me? She was playing her pregnancy victim card, like I can do anything I want because I am carrying a child inside of me. I said, woman, pregnancy is not a ticket to get away with your nuisance. She tried to mess up with my grandparents until we showed her the camera installed across the house. I said, one more time you set your foot here, and I'm going to get you arrested. Then comes my mother to defend her golden stepdaughter. She accused me of abusing and mentally torturing her pregnant Brenda. She said she is going to sue me for this. I said, sure, let the judge decide based on the camera footage. When she could no longer win through force, she mellowed down. She started sobbing and said, what did she do wrong in raising me that I became a self-centered individual? She started blaming herself for not raising me properly. She, in fact, brought my dead father in between and said it was his fault that he died so early and didn't give me a proper upbringing. I said, hold on. If anyone is to be blamed, it has to be you. Not for raising me wrong, because you never raised me. I'm raised by my grandparents, and they did a pretty good job. You should feel sorry for abandoning me, but you know what? Glad you didn't raise me. I see how badly you've raised your stepdaughter. I brought her up teen pregnancy thing also. I know I shouldn't have done moral policing, but in the moment of rage, I did. Naturally, she got furious at me. I realized I had overstepped my boundaries, so I remained quiet after that. I said I didn't want to get into any further talks. I just want my property back. I have let them live there for free for so many years. Now I really need it. I tried to make her understand in my situation that I had quit my job and needed money to start my business, so I would be leasing the house. She flipped out that I was throwing them out only to let other strangers live there. I said the other strangers are going to pay me rent. If you agree to pay, you can live there. She again freaked out that I was bringing money into the family matters. I said, there isn't any family here. You threw me away like a pile of garbage and hardly checked on me. My birthdays, Christmas, Thanksgiving, you barely showed up, and even when you did, you made me feel that you were doing me a favor. What kind of mother does that? A mother like you, right. She tried all means to manipulate me, gaslighting, guilt-tripping, and her usual ones, anger. When she understood that I got no chills, she left. You guys are thinking that they vacated the house after that. A big no, they didn't. Mom's loser husband was yet to come into the picture. That crap-headed man sent a voicemail. Dude, you don't know who you're messing with. I can deadlift you and make you plead for your life. One punch on your face and you're going to forget about the house. You show up at my door again and I'm going to knock you out. That dude is big and he loves to flaunt it. I don't know much about him, but my grandparents cautioned me not to mess with him. He is a bully. Sure he is, but he is a dummy. He laid out the evidence against himself by threatening me over voicemail. I didn't respond to him because I wanted a bigger dude to handle him, the cops. On the supposed day of eviction, I went to the station and registered a case of threats. I had a solid evidence. My lawyer walked down with me to the station and requested the cops to accompany us to the eviction. Initially, they were not ready to come. They said call us if they caused trouble, but we didn't want to deal with the squatters by ourselves. Some cash helped in getting them on board, and they accompanied us. When I reached the house with my lawyer, they, Mom, Bill, and Brenda, started cussing us. Her loser husband even came out with a hockey stick, but as soon as they saw the cop's vehicle behind our car, he stepped back. The cops showed them the eviction notice and asked them to leave. They were so confident of chasing me out that they didn't even pack their stuff. They asked the cops to give them a further 1 month's time. The cops looked at me and I said, no way, not after all these threats. They started using Brenda's pregnancy to buy a few more days, but I put my foot down and said, now. I got some weird looks from the cops that I was insensitive, but I was following the legal route, so no one had any say. They further bargained to give me a day's time. I said 3 hours from now. They gave me looks of bitterness. Bill even tried to brush his shoulder against me with red eyes. The cops yelled, get moving. More of packing and less of giving looks. We all left after that. The cops asked them to hand over the keys at the station from where I would pick it up. We had to pay the cops extra bucks to facilitate this, and it was completely worth it. Who wants to deal with those squatters? My lawyer suggested I take a restraining order against them on the property in case they want to come back and harass me or the tenants. They were well capable of doing that. We took it, and the cops shared a copy of the restraining order with them and explained the consequences of violating it. The paleness on their faces was unmissable. So finally, I got the house and I have put it up for lease. I hope to get a good deal and I'm able to start my business as soon as possible. Enough of dealing with the craphead people. This would mostly be my last update unless they come back to mess with me again. Thanks for reading this and supporting me throughout. First, Mom tries to pull the sympathy card. Then her precious stepdaughter jumps into the fray, waving around her pregnancy like it's a get-out-of-jail-free card. Sorry, Brenda, but having a bun in the oven doesn't excuse being a royal pain in the backside. Then dear old Bill, the lumbering oaf who thinks he's a tough stuff with his hockey stick threats. Newsflash, buddy, you're about as intimidating as a wet noodle. Here's to you, OP, who's turned eviction into an art form and made squatter shoeing look like child's play. And as for Mom and her sorry excuse for a family, well, they've learned the hard way that you don't mess with someone who's got justice, determination, and a darn good lawyer on their side. So long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, adieu. What are your thoughts? Share them with us in the comments below. Thank you for joining us today on the rLounge. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video. See you soon.